Okay, we are live now for our, well, this was, I guess, supposed to be the September Patreon Hangout. It's actually October because I couldn't live stream. I was going to do it yesterday, but anyway, we've got Chris Hangartner.
Hey.
And we have Patreon Josh.
Hello.
Thanks for joining. Thanks for being a patron. We'll have to see who else comes in.
I hope people come in because I don't have much to talk about.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, the Thunderfoot fans, oh God, I have had to block so many of them in the last few days. I think I've blocked more of them in the last few days than I've blocked everyone else in the last 10 years. God,
yeah.
they are just, oh.
Yeah, they're still getting their panties in and out over the Hyperloop thing.
Yeah. And you know, they flagged my video and that took it down, and so I got a copyright strike, so I can't live stream over on my main channel, so we'll try live streaming over here and seeing how it goes.
Oh. Wow.
Oh, so I didn't tell you guys this. When I posted that saying what had happened, I decided to give people the link to the version on Dailymotion, which is the one I give the patrons. So I put that up there. Guess what happens a couple hours later?
What?
On Dailymotion, it says, oh, we removed this because it violates our community guidelines. And I got to say, Dailymotion support is awesome. I contacted them, said, like, you know, why is this? You know, get back to me. Within an hour, they got back to me and they said, yeah, people flagged it. They must have made a mistake. It's back now. So nice try.
Hey, some people.
If only YouTube were that responsive.
Yeah. Yeah, I do give them credit for that. At least they respond.
Yeah. I mean, if Dailymotion, if I could get the same number of views and the same kind of monetization on Dailymotion that I do on YouTube, I'd be over there full time.
Yeah. Well, Dailymotion's also, it doesn't have the fact that Dailymotion's more buggy and all that too, so.
Yeah.
What are the biggest competitors to YouTube?
Right now, I think VidMe is kind of an up-and-comer. But they're still getting all their monetization stuff in there. I think they've added on advertisements. I don't know, maybe someone could watch one of my videos over on VidMe and see if they get an ad, but I think they've added that. They're at least going to at some point.
And Shane, unfortunately, I had to. Well, I mean, I didn't get too argumentative, but I had to. But I was talking to a coworker, and we were talking just random stuff, and we brought up healthcare and all that. And he actually believes that, you know, that hospitals shouldn't be competitive because he thinks that hospitals, you know, shouldn't be in it for the money. They should be in it to care for people. And I mean, he's a coworker, so I couldn't like yell at him the way you do. But I tried to tell him, buddy, if you want that kind of healthcare system, just go to the UK.
Yep.
See how well it works there.
How do you expect someone to work for free? I don't get that.
You don't.
Well, it's interesting. I've got. I think I might have this in the link for in the links for Bugacity next week. I mean, they're not finalized. I don't know if I'll use it or not. But apparently, Cuba is renting out doctors to Brazil, and a lot of doctors in Cuba are just protesting. They're saying, "This is slavery. We've had enough of it."
Yeah, you actually said that, I think, in your How to Argue for Healthcare, because people say, well, you have the right to be cared for when you're sick, and you're basically saying, well, by saying that, you're basically saying the doctor is your slave then.
Well, that's what Cuban doctors are saying now. They're actually using the slavery word.
Yep.
Because they have no choice about where to go or what to do or anything like that. They have to do it.
Speaking of which, Shane, your video with when you were talking about East Germany with Lord Dapperton, that kind of reminds me of this one guy I met online one time who flat out said, "Well, did you know many East Germans wish that the old Democratic Republic of Germany was back?" Yeah, and apparently there's a movement called, like, part of my German, it's like Ostalgia, which basically means nostalgia. And I'm just thinking, you do realize that the biggest problem with nostalgia is that you remember what you liked, but you forget what you didn't like.
Right. You know? Yeah. If it was so wonderful, how come they had to build a wall to stop people from leaving?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I've even seen people defend the Trabant, believe it or not.
Wow. Well, I mean, there are some classic car aficionados who love it because they love, working on it mechanically and stuff like that.
Yeah, I have heard that despite how primitive they are interesting cars to work with. So
yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah,
but this is about the patrons ultimately, and so Josh, you posted a link about something you wanted to talk about, and welcome Pipsqueak to the call. But apparently, Roger Ver, who is a big name in cryptocurrency and libertarian circles, is trying to start his own country. So, Pip, why don't you introduce yourselves, and then Josh, you can tell us about Roger Ver.
Am I coming through clear?
You are clear.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Captain Pipsqueak. I occasionally write comments that make people very, very mad on YouTube videos. I have a tendency of doing that.
That's a fun thing to do, isn't it?
It is. It is.
Oh, great! Another pony.
You say that like it's a bad thing.
Yeah, I'm kind of sort of in the brony fandom, although sadly it's slowly being taken over by SJWs.
Yeah, that's what Travis keeps saying. Yeah.
Surprisingly enough, given especially considering. Oh God! Especially considering the political culture here in Australia these days, that hasn't actually happened.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, Josh, what were you wanting to talk about with this story about Roger Ver?
I just wanted your thoughts. I mean, I don't know much about Roger Ver. I've heard of things like the Free State Project. I've heard of Liberland.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Roger Ver. I don't know a whole lot about it, but this is another attempt to create a society based on libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, voluntarist, whatever you want to call it. And in the past, like they've talked about things like seasteading, and seasteading is basically where you go and make your own floating island, on a cruise ship or some kind of thing out in international waters, and you just moor it and become
international law won't recognize it.
Yeah,
what's that?
Statist international law won't recognize it as a country because it's not a landmass.
Well, but the idea is to make it a landmass.
It actually specifically specifies that even if you make like an artificial landmass, it's not recognized under international law.
Yeah, and it's got other issues as well, like getting power, drinkable water, internet access, things like that.
Yeah, but Shane, you can't have an anarcho-capitalist society. Otherwise, it'll turn into this dystopian future where the rich will exploit the poor and all that. Oh, where'd you learn that? BioShock.
They're not doing that now.
It's like when states tell us to leave all the states. We literally can't. They won't let us.
The funny thing about BioShock is that everyone, uses that as an example, and obviously it's a video game, so that's a perfect source of information. But second of all, I think the biggest problem in BioShock with the main villain wasn't his philosophy. It was pretty simple. Yeah, he had somewhat of a free market capitalist policy, but here's one thing. He forbade anyone from Rapture, which was his underwater city, from trading with the outside world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You gotta have free trade.
I think, yep. I would actually disagree with that because before the whole Splicer thing went down, it seemed to be growing fairly like there was new industries to mimicking those up on the surface springing up about the place, and that would have improved. I think that the problem is Andrew went against his own philosophy in his sort of war against Fontaine.
Yep,
that's when everything started spiraling downward.
He became the very thing he swore he would destroy.
How it usually goes in history.
And speaking of free trade, Shane, I saw this really funny video by you guys know Simon Whistler, right? That British guy who he's okay, but he told an interesting story about how it was actually the chickens almost destroyed the NATO alliance.
I have to say about Simon Whistler, if I had been more familiar with him and his videos, I wouldn't have been quite so hard on him when I made that minimum wage video against him.
Well, he's kind of a mixed bag for me. He does some really good videos, but there's other times where he does kind of pander, to pop history and all that. So
yeah, he's kind of a mixed bag, but he wasn't anywhere near as bad as I was making him out to be.
Yeah, well, anyway, here's basically what happened. It was jokingly called the Chicken Wars. Basically, what happened was that after the end of World War II, because the Europeans, lost a lot of their factories due to the war, what happened was that the U.S. was importing a lot of stuff. Their businesses, in particular, chicken was becoming very popular, and the chickens imported to Europe from the U.S. were extremely cheap. And it was good for the Europeans because they could finally get some meat that was, fairly reasonable price. But that kind of angered a few European big agricultural conglomerates. So they petitioned the European Commission, or whatever it was, the precursor to the EU, to basically raise taxes and tariffs on U.S. chicken imports. And it was so detrimental that, according to the West German president, he was constantly talking about it during NATO meetings, even as the Soviets were acting more aggressive.
So getting back to the story, another way that was tried was something called Liberland.
Yeah.
And this was basically a little area between Serbia and Croatia that Croatia had said was not a part of them. That's part of Serbia. And Serbia was like, we don't want it. It's a god-awful piece of swampland. It's not ours. So some libertarians said, hey, we'll move there and live there and set up Liberland. And pretty much as soon as they did, the Croatian government started arresting them.
So Shane, do you think the United States has a chance to become libertarian, or do you think we're too far gone?
Well, there's no such thing as too late. I mean, there's always time to turn it back. The question is, are we going to turn it back, on our own, or is it going to collapse and become Venezuela?
Yeah.
So.
Speaking of which, Shane, I've seen a couple of ANCOMs say that Rojava is a perfect example of anarcho-communism working.
What is?
Rojava, or whatever it's called, that little province in Syria, they declared themselves an independent state, and they're trying to practice like this social confederism or something.
Well, just see what happens when they start running out of other people's money.
They're already running out of other people's money.
Yeah.
They've been around. Just start printing it.
They've claimed to have been around since 2009, but they are, according to a lot of inside sources, they're barely hanging in there, and Serbia's on the verge of re-annexing them.
Yeah.
Not Serbia, Syria.
So yeah, both of those are issues. So what Roger Ver and a bunch of others are doing is kind of interesting. They've apparently got at least some money together, and I guess they're going to raise more. The idea is they're going to find an existing nation and say, hey, sell us some of your land. And I guess it would be kind of like the Louisiana Purchase. You buy the land from the government, and then that land is no longer part of the government, and you can form your own state there. So that's more of an interesting way of going about doing it, because at least then you would have the recognition of that one state, and that would at least open the doors to recognition by others. And they also say they want proximity to existing economic powerhouses, U.S., Europe, Asia, accessibility by water, located in a safe conflict-free area, stable existing government, nations with a significant national debt, a flexible constitution that allows granting sovereignty, and an acceptable minimum size for the land. So they can actually be able to set up something but still have like access to trade, access to being able to get drinkable water, produce electricity, connect to the internet, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I think, at least has a better chance of working.
Sounds like a good place. Sounds like it has a decent chance of actually working out.
So one of the guys involved is Oliver Janssens. He told 71 Republic, quote, "We have backing of over 100 million USD, that's US dollars, in private capital, and are committed to the mission of realizing the world's first free society." Not really sure how much $100 million would buy you, but like I say, it's a start.
Do you know much about the Free State Project? Is that having any headway?
Well, I get reports from it, and they're getting people elected to office, and they have been able to stop certain things. I'm trying to think of one of their successes off the top of my head. It's not been any big ones, but there's been a lot of smaller successes they've had with more minor things, but they're working on it. it's not exactly libertopia, but they're having a positive effect. So.
Yeah, I think like you said earlier, though, Shane, the hardest problem with setting up, a libertarian-like area isn't getting everything ready. It's trying to convince the rest of the world, not to leave us alone unless you're going to trade with us. Because I've actually read throughout history, that libertarians actually legitimately can make the claim libertarian societies have been tried, but the reason why they failed was because nobody let them work.
Right, there was like one, I forget what it was, in like South Pacific or somewhere like that, and they said, well, it didn't work, it failed. It's like, why did it fail? Well, because this other country invaded them. Yeah.
Well, it also kind of reminds me about what some socialists argue. They say the reason why Marxism failed all over the world was because nobody let it succeed. And I asked them, well, name me one example. Well, Chile was an example. Chile had a Marxist in power, and they were going to become rich, but then Pinochet took over. And I did a little research, and you know why Pinochet took over? Because after the Marxists took power and they implemented all their Marxist policy, the Chilean economy crashed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Pinochet was not exactly the greatest guy that a libertarian would want, but you look at what was going on before, and you can kind of see why. It's like, okay, let's have anyone else after this.
Yeah, that's what I tell people. I tell them, look, I'm not saying, Pinochet was good, but Allende dug his own grave. He destroyed the Chilean economy, and when people approached him saying this isn't working, he says, oh, of course it's working. It's those evil rich Chilean miners who are hogging all their money and all that.
It's always someone else's fault. Someone's hogging all the money. And
yeah.
Oh, I'm reminded of that scene in the sewer from Blues Brothers.
Yeah.
He just ends
where he's like, it's not my fault. My suit didn't come back from the cleaners. I ran out of gas. There were locusts. It's not my fault.
I swear to God, it's not my fault.
I think I saw this one parody sci-fi guy where the sci-fi said the biggest flaw with human beings isn't their violence. It's not their flesh. It's that they're the only creatures in the galaxy that won't admit their faults.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's always someone else's fault. It's never our fault.
Oh God, scroll down to the comments on the they are so toxic.
What toxic?
It will run out of land and regress to feudalism because only a few people will own land and the rest will be tenants.
Do these people not realize what feudalism is?
Apparently not, and I've made like 3 or 4 videos on it.
When do socialists know their history properly?
Yeah, especially if I recall correctly, when you think about it, feudalism is just a form of collectivism. The only difference is that instead of the quote-unquote people owning everything, the king owns everything.
Well, the king owns everything, and then the king parcels out areas to lords. And so if you live on the lord's property, you're a serf, and then you work and you pay tribute to your lord. And if you don't like it and you want to leave, you have to save up enough to pay your exit fee. And tell me what's the difference between that and countries today?
Yeah, I know.
Well, the difference between that and countries today is we're all basically what they called freedmen, which basically meant you could actually move between towns. Woo!
Well, we can move between towns, but if we want to move out of the country, we have to pay an expat tax.
Yeah, why do you have that? That's ridiculous. It seems like a massive violation of people's right to freedom of association.
I think since we're calling back to movies, I think the argument is the one Max Bialystock made in The Producers, which is, I want that money!
What do you think of open borders, Shane?
I have videos on it, so I actually made one in response to that guy T about it, which I think I really made. I really don't get, because you have people like Hoppe, and I recently heard Bob Murphy talking about this, and it's like, well, this is just a matter of property rights, and it's a violation of property rights to just let whoever wants to come across our borders because you don't want them just coming into your home, do you? And I'm like, that's not the way it works. Closed borders is a violation of my property rights and my freedom of association if I want to invite a Mexican over to my house for a barbecue or rent him a room, or if I want to hire him to work in my business, and then the government says I can't just because he's on the other side of this arbitrarily drawn line that's only there as a result of a war, how is that's the violation of property rights there.
Like, I will say this, Shane, I can kind of see an argument for borders and, about how getting rid of them is not going to fix anything. I think the problem with borders is that instead of them being founded by the individual people based on, what they agreed upon, they're all about the states, and we have cases like Georgia and North Ossetia, and even though North Ossetia was always historically recognized as being part of Georgia, and the majority of people living there are Georgians, the North Ossetians saying, no, we're independent because Russia said so.
But I mean, really, what's the difference between a Mexican moving to America and someone from, Mississippi moving to, Nebraska or whatever? What's the difference?
The accent.
Oh, you got a difference in accent there too,
Yeah. Okay, I'm getting static.
I'm getting something like that too. I'm not sure who it's coming from.
It's not me because my microphone's been muted.
Yeah, I think that's all we can talk about with this Roger Ver thing. Anyone have any other topics?
Nobody else is going to pipe up. I've got one. I've always found it a bit annoying that it's like whenever someone brings up, oh, you libertarians all want to get rid of police, and then, the person in question replies back, no, we want to privatize police. Haven't we already done that? They're called private investigators because police force isn't a protective force. It's an investigative one. It indirectly protects the population by identifying and prosecuting criminals. That's its job. Its job isn't to protect. They're not the same thing as actual security people. They're investigators, primarily. Oh.
Yeah, we're getting static over your mic, Pipsqueak, but yeah, I got what you said there. And yeah, they're not really there to serve and protect. They're there to mop up afterwards and, figure out, who did what and arrest people. And so it's not like a security guard. It is more akin to a private investigator, but I mean, they're still a monopoly because no matter what, you have to pay the taxes for your local police department. So, I mean, really, the only difference is you just have a choice of which one you wanted to fund.
Yeah.
Do you think cops tend to be inherently bad, inherently statist, or do you think that's just a small number of actual cops?
I think that, well, the issue is just there's not really any sort of accountability for anything they've done. And I mean, whenever you have people who are given all of this power and no accountability, that's just what happens. But if you had competition, you could say, okay, well, those guys are out there roughing up people and arresting them because of a plant, and they're shooting people because they didn't show them their driver's license and stuff like that. Well, guess what? I'm not going to give them my money. I'm going to give my money to these other people that don't do it.
Speaking of which, Shane, going back to the whole privatization thing, I saw this one really stupid person who said, the reason why we need to have a government monopoly on groups like the fire department is, he says, well, because in the old days, fire departments were privatized and they competed, and as consequences, they wouldn't fight fires because they were too busy fighting each other because they wanted to get paid. And I wanted to point out, yeah, and you do realize, what happens if you do that in the long run. The fire gets burnt out, and then the people who hired you are going to be like, what the hell were you guys doing?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually what really ended that practice. It wasn't the government snipping in and monopolizing it, although some took advantage of that. It was mostly just the fact that people were saying, look, while we're still, higher, there'll still be competition amongst the fire departments. It's not going to be first come, first serve. It's going to be, we're going to hire them right away, Basically, it
was the insurance companies that really did it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
basically.
You could do it as on a charity basis, like we do here in Australia. We have plenty of volunteer firefighting associations out in the country where government can't really project force out in that area.
That's done here in the United States, too.
Yep.
Yeah, I've sort of heard something about that strange little system happening in the United States. It's like you're out in the middle of nowhere where you don't really have a lot of built-up infrastructure for the government fire departments. Like, people will just start their own. It's not like they can't do that.
Yeah, we're really getting a lot of static from you there.
Yeah.
Getting harder to hear you.
Yeah, and Shane, I remember one time when I went through this little program in high school called the Junior Police Academy. It was for people who are interested in becoming police officers, and we did briefly tour one of the fire departments, and like that fire department was really nice. Like, it's like one of those like 3-story motels that was really nice. They got to do things like work a 24-hour shift, but like they get all these benefits of money. And here I am thinking, oh great, your taxpayer dollars at work. And people are like, yeah, but they run into burning buildings. And I say, that rarely happens though. Yeah, even the guy who was giving the tour himself admitted 90% of our 911 calls are just medical calls.
Yeah. Or putting out, box fires or brush fires or things like that.
Yeah, so, this, nothing against fire departments, but this heroic image you see on TV or movies, of that brave fireman, charging into a burning building with the axe and trying to rescue the crying baby, that almost never happens.
Yeah, and in case you think fire departments can't get corrupt, my local fire department is an example of how that's just not the case. And I'll just give you one little example. Like when they were going through and auditing their books, they found out that they had this line item for 1 year. They budgeted $40,000 of taxpayer money to go towards maintenance of their Dalmatian. Now, first of all, $40,000 sounds like a lot for that. Second of all, they don't have a Dalmatian. Yeah.
Actually, I actually read a forum one time about a guy who had a dickish fire department because what happened was that he and his buddies, they were on a farm one time on their relatives, and they were burning trash, which was legal, by the way. They had permission, they told it ahead of time, but unfortunately, out of nowhere, the wind picked up and it blew, and out of fear, they called the fire department just in case, and the fire department said they were on their way. However, though, it was getting close to their house, so they had to extinguish it as quickly as possible, and they miraculously extinguished it because they were afraid it was going to burn down their house. And when the fire department got there, even though it was pretty clear there had been a fire and they explained what happened, the fire department says, well, we're going to fine you several $1,000s because you called 911 on us and you didn't, and we didn't put out a fire, so we're fining you.
I heard of one case where this guy's house was on fire, and he was actually arrested because what he was doing was he had his garden hose out, and he wasn't even trying to fight the fire. He was soaking the ground between his house and his neighbors so that it wouldn't spread, and they arrested him for it.
God, that sounds like the friggin' water usage restrictions we have here in Australia whenever there's a doubt. It gets ridiculous.
Yeah, we get those here too.
Yeah, pipsqueaks. I've heard that sadly Australia is no longer the country of fun because in several parts of Australia they've officially banned fun.
Yeah, we've covered those. Yeah,
it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, it's fun, it's illegal. We've talked about that in Sydney and Canberra, stories where like you're not allowed to serve alcohol after 10 o'clock and stuff like that.
You're not allowed to stand up in the back of a ute.
Do you think we're a police state at this point, Shane?
What's that?
Do you think America could qualify as a police state?
I don't know, parts of it maybe. A lot of it depends on your definition. I kind of like the way, the late, great Aaron Russo put it, and he was a sweetheart of a guy, but he said, okay, think about this. You're driving down the road. You're doing absolutely nothing wrong. You're obeying all the traffic laws. You don't have a body in your trunk or anything like that. A policeman comes up behind you and starts following you. Do you feel safe and secure, or do you feel nervous? If you feel nervous, you might be living in a police state.
I feel nervous. I would say Wisconsin is a police state per se, but Wisconsin's one of those states where they are really, really picky with their traffic laws. So
yeah.
Well, yeah. I am a white guy.
I don't know. I wouldn't really, having an outsider's point on this, I wouldn't really call America a police state, because if parts of America are a police state, then Australia is definitely a police state, especially with laws like 18C and all that.
Now, what's 18C?
18C is part of the racial discrimination laws, and it basically makes all of the social justice terms under the sun a protected class that you can't discriminate against. And it's
I
basically
think we
used to
covered a
suppress
story like that where this one woman who was of Aboriginal descent at this university, I think it was Queensland University, she kicked all the white people out of the computer lab.
Yeah, that's the one. She kicked all the white people out of the lab, and then when the white people complained that discrimination, in order to fight discrimination, they brought the Aboriginal teacher brought them up on discrimination charges, despite the fact that 18D is the section that actually makes that specific speech illegal. But of course, with these things, it's not being guilty that's the crime, it's the process. They were dragged through the courts and had to settle with thousands of dollars for a student, really.
But it's like but like I say, a lot of it is like, how do you define a police state? Like, I think if you look at state troopers all over the country, or whoever in that state is in charge of the traffic laws, almost all of the traffic laws that exist have nothing to do with keeping us safe. It's about getting money for the state.
Yep, that's
revenue generation.
That's what tickets are. Yep, people feel. Yeah, a lot of people justify saying, "Well, we need to have tickets for a reason, right? Because we need to punish people who speed." It has been scientifically proven over and over again by many great mathematicians and philosophers. Speeding and traffic tickets do nothing to deter crime. They're there for one reason and one reason only, and that's to bring money to the state.
Well, and that's what we saw in Montana.
That's to make the roads less safe in some cases, because people get so pissed off that they have to drive so slowly, they're angry, and the driving ability suffers for it.
Well, like there was a time for a period of years in the 90s when the Supreme Court overturned it somehow, but they didn't have any speed limits on their highways and rural roads. And what happened was the average speed only increased by like 3 miles an hour or something like that. But it was so much safer because people were paying attention. They had better lane courtesy, and there were actually fewer accidents and fatalities.
Yeah, there was actually, I think it was on John Stossel one time they were discussing this, and I think it was in the Netherlands or something, but they went to the Netherlands, and guess what? A lot of roads in the Netherlands, they don't have street lights, and they don't have speed limits. Yep. Now, a lot of people would think, well, if that happens, then everyone's going to crash into each other, but they actually showed a picture of a very busy Dutch highway. Everyone was being careful. They were doing what you said. They were like carefully, they were looking, they were observing their surroundings. They were kind of squeezing through one another,
Yeah, it's called shared space.
Funny how that works.
And I actually remember.
I mean, what they've said is like, okay, here we can set up a shared space intersection. Here we can set up a roundabout, and all these other things that they've really been looking at and say what's required at this intersection. And they've done that to a lot of intersections. And they said they hadn't looked at a single intersection that was made better with traffic lights.
Yep. And actually, Shane, I actually read one article, and it was about how your brain can trick you sometimes. And they've actually found that sometimes traffic lights can actually cause car accidents, not because people don't obey them, but it's because people are so used to learning, okay, when you see red, you stop. When you see green, you go. So when they see a green light, they say, okay, I'm safe to go, but they don't actually look. So that person who runs the red light or doesn't notice them.
Yeah, and that's why
they're not looking for
the delay between it turning red one way and turning green the other way. But then you get into the whole issue of the red light cameras, which are a whole other scam on their own.
Oh, yeah, those.
Yep. Yeah. I actually had to run a red light one time
everywhere they've put up where they've studied this, all of the intersections that had the red light cameras had shorter yellow light times so they could catch more people. It's about revenue generation, not about keeping you safe.
Yeah.
That's making it more dangerous.
I won't lie though. I ran a red light one time because I not know what happened, but in Green Bay, we have terrible traffic lights, and there was just one intersection I was on where the light would not change. I swear, the other sides, they went through the yield, and they turned red. They did it 3 times, and the red light I was on wouldn't change. So finally, when I noticed there was no one coming in, I'm like, you know what, screw this. I really got to get there because I was on work, and I was coming back from a pizza delivery, and I'm like, I got to get to work. So I said, screw it.
I think most states have something like that. If you sit through like 3 cycles of the light and you haven't gotten a green light, it's obviously stuck. So, yield right away to other people, but then go.
I've done that before. Coming out of work in the city off of a night shift. It's early morning, and the roadworks, night works, have just finished, but they haven't reset the traffic lights yet. So you backed up like 2 or 3 streets back because the damn lights haven't turned green. It's like the truck in front of me just like, screw this. The intersection's clear. I'm just running the red light. Like, I'm following you, mate. I'm not waiting here for another half an hour till they get off their ass.
So it's funny. It's funny you're from Australia, Pipsqueak, because I saw this interesting video one time about Australia and in some cities they have really crappy parking laws and all that. That some companies have actually hired girls to automatically put coins in the parking meters so tourists won't get ticketed.
Oh, that's something else the Free State Project had done one time. They call it Robin Hooding. And so what they would do is they would go running around to all of these different, parking lots with, a bunch of quarters or dimes or whatever it is they take. And anyone that was about to expire or had expired, they put money in it, and they kept getting arrested for it. And they were saying things like, oh, they were causing all of this grief to those, poor meter readers who didn't get to write tickets, and was causing them all sorts of emotional distress and all that. It was just crazy.
That's the reason. That's the reason why they want those things to expire, because the government, because it's like, well, I'm paying for it, right? Yeah, but here's the thing: you're just giving like a quarter or something. If they give you a ticket, they can get like up to $100. So
it's about the money. Yep.
Oh yeah, every royal show, the local council puts up temporary parking changes.
Oh yeah,
they have officers every half hour.
I wonder if you actually did a study of a bunch of parking meters and like recorded them as they went out their day, and like if you parked for 30 minutes and expired, I wonder how many you'd find that had a little timing error and it went off at like 28 minutes instead of 30 or something like that.
Yeah. And again,
the whole thing about the yellow light times makes me wonder about that.
It wouldn't surprise me.
And again, going back to the whole meter maid thing, I've actually heard some stories from plenty of people that have said, they've walked out and like their thing just expired and the meter maid was writing a ticket. It's like, it just expired 2 seconds ago. Can't I just put in more cash? And like, nope, we take this rule very seriously. So sorry. Here's $50. Here's the court, and here's the court.
When it comes to revenue raising, they're spot on.
Yep.
It's like,
and Pipsqueak, I don't know if they do.
A lot of my liberal friends seem to have this idea that government is somehow benevolent, and that's not about getting money. It's not about getting power.
As if.
No, that's what those horrible capitalists are all about. Government doesn't do that. What are you talking about?
Yeah. It's pretty funny because people.
Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
It's pretty funny because people say, yeah, but I have more control over the government than I do a corporation because I can vote. And I'm like, you have more power. You have more power over McDonald's than you ever do over a senator, because I tell this
actually this is very accurate to what's happening here in Australia with like the whole. I assume you guys have heard of the whole gay marriage survey thing that's going on.
Oh yeah.
The leader of the opposition party has basically come out and said that if his party is elected next election, he's instituting that. He's putting gay marriage into the legislation, whether the yes vote succeeds or not.
I'm wondering, have you seen
anyone else as furiously angry about him saying that as I am? Really?
I mean, not
we're supposed to rely on democracy to. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Have you seen Bering's video on that? Because I'm kind of wondering. What your opinion would be on that?
Yes, I have seen Bering's video on that.
It's pretty funny because people are going to criticize us saying, oh, so you're against gay rights. No, we're for gay rights, but the fact that it's not that, it's the principle. It's that the politician says, I like this law so much that I'm going to put it in place regardless of the rules. You know what's going to happen? Somewhere
they're going to put in a really, really shitty version, and considering just how much political clout the SJWs have here in Australia, it's extremely concerning what they may put in. And we have zero certainty about it. I mean, Bering's absolutely right. We have zero uncertainty. Myself, well, the government taxes us all, so I don't think the government should be capable of discriminating who to give or not give services to based on anything.
Yeah,
and that's what Bering was saying, because he's saying, he was fine with gay marriage, but if this passes, what's going to happen when you have someone who speaks out against gay marriage because they don't have the same freedom of speech protections that we have here in America? And what if a minister doesn't want to marry a gay couple? Well, here we have freedom of religion, so they don't have to. But what about Australia?
There's actually the other concern that wasn't mentioned. The High Court of Australia has basically come out and said that if the Australian Marriage Act was to change to two adults, two consenting adults to get married, there would be no legal basis to prevent polygamy or something like that happening.
I'm fine with polygamy.
Okay. It's like, okay, the leftists have been going, oh no, it'll all be fine, there's no slippery slopes. Like, no, the High Court has come out and said that this is a slippery slope.
Yeah, but polygamy, as long as they're all consenting adults, who cares?
Really? Yeah. Can I say something, guys?
Things like heart progress, it's like if they get actual traction, dear God.
Well, can I say something now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was about to say another problem that this could have unintentionally if this minister, says if I get elected, I'm gonna screw the rules and make my own. What's gonna happen, down the line when another Australian politician says that and he says I'm gonna ban all freedom of speech, and when people say, well, you can't do that, you have to get it voted, and I'm like, well, why not? This guy passed a law without votes, so why can't I? And you can argue that. It's a survey,
not a plebiscite. It's non-binding.
But still,
that's something else that happened here in Charlotte when they built, I think it was a football stadium. They had done this thing where they were going to have the big, referendum on it and put it to the people, and there was a huge amount of opposition to it, and so they had stuck it in this referendum with a whole bunch of arts funding. Like, you're not against the arts, are you? Well, guess what? Charlotteans saw through that and voted it down, and they built the arena anyway.
Yeah.
Do you guys know the definition differences, survey, plebiscite, referendum here?
Well, I'm not familiar with the Australian law, so...
Yeah, it's like, a survey is just, survey, you can put whatever bloody question you want on it. Plebiscite is the lower house proposes a piece of legislation, and the people vote on it in a direct democracy sense. And then it goes to the upper house, and if they approve it, goes into law. A referendum is a majority of Australians overall, and then a majority of states, and then that's binding. That doesn't go through Parliament. That's a direct amendment to the Australian Constitution, is a referendum.
But what it seems to me like is, I think the way we think of survey is probably more accurate, because I'm not really sure how it works in Australia, but in this case, they're just mailing people stuff and asking them to check yes or no. That's not like a referendum, right? A referendum would be where you went like to a voting place.
Yeah, this is just a postal survey. I mean, even a plebiscite, I think you would actually, the Constitution requires you to actually set up voting booths because of secret ballot and all that. So yeah, this is just a survey. It has no legal weight at all, pretty much.
Yeah. Another thing, another thing about Australia that really ticks me off about the Australian government was their war on guns.
Oh God, that was horrible.
It's pretty funny, It's like they have one mass shooting, just one mass shooting. And then it's like, oh, it's becoming an epidemic. We gotta ban guns.
and then every about 3 or 4 weeks, some bikie hideout is raided. And they've got 12 shotguns, 17 rifles, bloody dozens of pistols. Like, really? Really? I mean, we're an island. We have some of the best customs and biosecurity in the world because, of course, we have a hell of a lot of parasites that we don't actually have here, and we want to keep it that way. And the guns still get in.
Oh yeah,
really?
Yep. I've heard from around the dark web that gun and drug smuggling is very popular in Australia. In fact, the Chinese
especially if you can keep it out of the hands of the cops. And this is why it's always pinned as such a big thing when they actually make a bust like this, because you don't hear about a lot of gun crime in Australia because the criminals don't want the cops to find out. Because as soon as that happens, the cops start digging, and then they have to go through all the trouble of smuggling more guns into the country. So almost all of the time, it just simply passes from one criminal's hand to another. It never gets into the hands of the general public or the police most of the time.
Oh yeah, in Pittsburgh.
But what I keep hearing from Australians is like, oh yeah, after the 96 gun buyback, there weren't any more mass shootings, which there are, but there's a Wikipedia page, list of massacres in Australia or something like that. If you look at that, and you look at massacres of all type, regardless of weapons, in the 21 years since the Port Arthur massacre, which is the one that was the impetus for all this, I think it was 88 people have been killed in massacres in Australia. And the 21 years before that, including the Port Arthur massacre, it was 90. So it basically made no difference in the number of people killed in mass killings.
But that's actually what the statists argue all the time. It's like, I remember with the UK, when they started cracking down on guns, they asked police officers, well, are you seeing a decrease or increase in crime? And they're like, nope, we're still seeing the same crime we always see. And people are saying, so it's a victory because nothing changed.
Hey Shane, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you remember that video years ago of Piers Morgan debating Larry Pratt? And Piers Morgan was saying there were like 35 gun murders in the UK a year, and Larry Pratt says closer to 1,000. Do you know anything about the numbers of gun death in the UK?
I don't know, but I do know they count them differently. In the United States, it's any of them that's cleared by arrest. In the UK, they go by convictions. So you're really counting.
I actually had to explain that to a friend of mine because a friend of mine was saying, but like in the US, we have like thousands of gun deaths every year, whereas the UK, they only have like 9. And I'm like, no, they have more than that. And I pointed out, but that's another thing is that they count crime differently. As you pointed out, police often count the crime the moment they get to the scene and arrest someone, whereas the UK, they don't count it until everything's gone through and the person's been convicted.
But like in our statistics, it counts things like self-defense.
Yep.
Stuff like that is going to be, if a guy successfully argues self-defense in court and gets acquitted, it still counts as a murder in the way we count it, but it doesn't in the way the UK counts it.
Granted, none of us are from Norway, so I don't know if this is true or not, but I've actually, because I have a couple of Norwegian buddies who I play games with, and they actually told me there's a really dumb law in a lot of parts of Norway where if a guy breaks into your house and he starts, taking all your stuff and raping your wife, and you grab like a baseball bat and you bash his head in and kill him to save your wife, you're going to jail for murder.
Oh yeah, excessive force laws. We had one like that in Victoria.
I've read about that in the UK as well.
Yeah, I understand the point behind excessive force. The problem is that so many of them are so vague that it's like, a guy came at you with a knife and it was pretty clear he was going to kill you, so you whack him in the head with a baseball bat and that first swing just happened to hit his head and kill him. They're like, oh yeah, but you beat him too badly, so you're going to jail.
Yeah.
It's because the state can never actually find out the entire context.
Yeah, not to mention, what if the guy, what if the guy is
a knowledge problem? What do you know?
And I even ask people, it's like, yeah, but still the guy who died, he had excessive, marks on him, and I'm like, well, what if, maybe there was like a fight, maybe the person being attacked, was fighting for his life, and he got a lucky blow and killed the guy. You just don't know.
Well, it's like what they train with police in self-defense. It's like you keep going at them until you're sure they're no longer a threat, because there have been plenty of instances where the guy who was defending himself stopped and the assailant just got back up and killed him.
Yeah, and that's what they say about things like, oh, well, you shouldn't have to shoot the guy, just show him your gun and scare him off. And the problem with that is you're kind of thinking like, what would you do in that situation if the guy points a gun at you? Of course, you're going to run, but you're thinking of it from your point of view as a rational human being. The fact is, just by breaking into your house, they've already proven that they're not irrational human beings, because rational human beings don't go breaking into people's houses.
Yeah. Not to mention,
you can't predict what they're going to do or how they're going to think or anything like that.
Not to mention, and believe it or not, Pipsqueak, this is kind of based off. This is an idea I based off of an actual incident that occurred in Australia. A common argument a lot of people say to prove that this guy's guilty or not is they say, well, he wasn't acting this way. And this actually goes back to an incident that happened in Australia. I'm pretty sure you've heard of it, Pipsqueak. It was that whole, I forgot her name, but it was that girl whose daughter was killed by a dingo, and everyone kept saying, oh no, she did it because she wasn't acting the way we thought she would.
And then you've got bad guys that are up on.
Is that the infamous "a dingo ate my baby"? That's pretty much a meme here.
Yeah, it's a meme in the United States too. They actually made fun of it in Tropic Thunder, where the guy's like, "Oh, maybe the dingo ate you."
Yeah,
and the guy's like, that was a real life incident. An actual baby died, and a mother was almost put away for the rest of her life because everyone thought she did it.
Yeah, dingoes are pretty bloody nasty.
Yeah, and it's pretty funny. All the animal rights activists
they'll eat whatever they can get.
Yeah, and all the animal rights activists were saying dingoes wouldn't do such a thing to a baby, and then years later they find baby remains with clothes that were of the baby that was reported missing, and it was found in a dingo den.
Wow.
That's the thing about most animal rights activists. They have no idea what real life nature is like.
Speaking of which, a friend of mine linked me an image to a PETA article where PETA was complaining about a game called Ark Survival, which is basically a survival multiplayer game where you can tame dinosaurs and all that on an island. And they said it was morally wrong to keep dinosaurs locked up in cages like that, and I'm just thinking, they're not real dinosaurs, PETA. They're computer-generated images.
It's because they've sort of
hang on.
They've sort of expended their social capital everywhere else, and nobody else will take them seriously anymore. So they have to go after the gamers because it's the only group left that might still take them seriously for a couple of months.
I mean, I'm okay with saying, hey, let's not be cruel to animals. Let's not, beat them up and torture them and things like that. But, I mean, this whole idea that, animals exist in this harmonious balance of nature, that's a lot of crap.
Well, that and PETA wants to exterminate most domesticated animals, which is why I don't respect them at all.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of the pets they don't even try to find homes for. They just euthanize them.
Wasn't there a story of some people in Asia that were manufacturing fake elephant tusks or something and trying to sell them so that they would?
Yeah, they've got artificial elephant ivory that's pretty much indistinguishable from the real thing, and they're trying to just make a lot of it and sell it on the market and get the price of it down so it won't be as profitable to hunt real elephants.
Right.
I'm back. Sorry, my pizza came. So I ordered a pizza.
And I think they're doing the same with rhino horn, too.
Mm-hmm.
That actually sounds like a really good idea because you can really synthesize the stuff much cheaper and much easier than it actually is to go out and hunt them.
Yeah. It's pretty. Yeah, John Stossel posted a video because even though he's no longer on Fox, he still posts videos on YouTube every now and then, and he was talking about the whole rhino horn thing, and this woman kept insisting, no, the only way we're going to save the rhinos and get rid of the demand for it is we have to ban it. And I just like how John Stossel pointed this out, and many people in the comments pointed it out. It's like, well, then if that's the case, then how come it's not working with drugs, Yep. Yeah. If anything, banning it kind of increases the demand in a way.
Well, because that puts it in the black market. The black marketeers who are obtaining it are taking risk, and risk increases the amount of money you demand for something.
That and it drives it underground, makes it harder to measure.
Yep.
Yeah,
but I mean, in places where, because here's the thing, rhino horns and elephant tusks grow back. I think it takes several months, but they can grow back. So, I mean, if you've got a case where you can legally harvest a rhino's horn, with a permit and permission of the property owners, then, okay, maybe it's not a pleasant thing for the rhino to go through, but it's better than slaughtering them and driving them to extinction.
Yeah, it's like, and it's pretty funny about PETA and animal rights activists is that they have no idea how Mother Nature works. Like, I remember, they were talking about, remember the quote-unquote documentary Blackfish?
I don't recall that one.
It was a documentary that quote-unquote exposed how orca whales were treated at SeaWorld, and as a result, SeaWorld canceled all their orca whale shows.
Oh, yeah. Heather was actually working at SeaWorld when all that happened, and she filled me in on all of that, and it's a load of crap, yeah.
Yeah, it's a load of crap, I mean.
Well, and it was all based on this one orca that had killed its trainer or whatever it was.
Yeah.
But if you look through the history of that orca, even at the other places it had been to before it had gotten to SeaWorld, it wasn't right in the head.
Yeah, and not to mention, people ignore this all the time. In real life, orcas do attack humans.
Orcas aren't actually whales. They're dolphins, and they have teeth, and you can't expect them to behave the way a whale does because they're not whales.
Oh yeah, that's the thing. You know, I mean, contrary to what animal hippies like to portray, orcas are not these peace-loving creatures that swim, sing, and dance in harmony. They're jerks in nature.
And they want you
There's
to
a
put them in
reason
the
why
same
they call them
category as
killer
like
whales.
humpbacks and other gentle whales like that, but they're not even in the same. What is that?
Yeah.
An order or a family? I don't know, but it's not even the same. Same category there.
They're toothed whales, and toothed whales are more aggressive and violent than the baleen whales because the baleen whales have no reason to be violent. They're so big that very few creatures are going to be able to eat them, so they're just they have no reason. But toothed whales are smaller and they have to be more competitive.
Technically, there's no such thing as a toothed whale. They're all dolphins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that'd be the food source because baleen whales feed on massive clouds of krill. You swim through the thing, whereas dolphins are much more predatory creatures. They eat things that can swim away.
Yeah, and some people take Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy at heart and think that dolphins are more intelligent than humans.
My favorite rebuttal.
They are
of that-
pretty intelligent, but that doesn't mean they won't bite your ass.
Yeah.
My favorite. Sorry.
Can I say this? I actually found a big loophole in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy involving dolphins. The dolphins were trying to warn us about the Vogons and how to protect us. I want to ask them this. If the dolphins were so intelligent, more intelligent than humans, how come they didn't realize that humans weren't understanding them and developed a different way to communicate with humans?
It's a comedy.
That's the high intelligence.
I know when you think about that, yeah.
That's the high intelligence, low wisdom problem.
I think I heard Rush Limbaugh say
the mice were the same way too. Like, mice are established to be the second most intelligent creatures in the galaxy, and humans are the third. And the mice are the same way. They're extremely intelligent, but they have no sense of wisdom.
They're also kind of jerks because they want to dissect Arthur and cut out his brain to get to the question.
Yeah.
Rush Limbaugh once said there's no shelf
Take his brain.
Yeah, but I mean, when people are thinking about dolphins, they usually think of like the bottlenose dolphin, which doesn't actually have a very large esophagus, and so all they really eat are tiny little fish. So they're not even going to try to bite a human or anything like that. It will be like one of us running up to an elephant and trying to eat it. But when you get something the size of an orca,
Yeah, and it's pretty funny about how they claim that the reason why some orcas why their dorsal fins droop forward is because they're sad, even though, well, first of all, we do see it happen in the wild, and it has nothing to do with their mood. It has to do with water pressure,
and it mostly has to do with how the depths of the water they go into. Because as long as they're under deep water, the water pressure can hold it in. If they're in shallower water, the collagen, I don't know if it lengthens or breaks or whatever, but it's the collagen that causes it to droop over.
Yeah, I'm gonna say this. It's pretty funny because people always say, well, animals don't want to live up in cages and all that, and it's like, why not? And it's pretty funny because people say, well, I'm pretty sure if you were to open up the gates, the animals would go free. Actually, most animals tend to be very territorial, and there's no doubt in my mind that if you were to open up, like the cages of the zoo, a lot of the animals would stay in their enclosures. I mean, they would, wander out, to scavenge, but they would eventually come back because why would they want to leave?
Well, that's exactly what happens when they have like the animal testing facilities and the animal rights people, run in and get them. They show them, they show you all the video of the animals scattering everywhere, pretending like they want to be free. What they don't tell you is the animals don't leave. You open the cage and it's like, almost like, I'm not going anywhere. And they have to poke them with sticks. They're actually poking them with sticks to get them to get out and run away. So they're not running away going free, free, free. They're running away going, help, this idiotic animal rights asshole is poking me with a stick.
Yeah, and I remember...
It's like open air. Yeah, if you've seen open air, like birds of prey demonstrations and stuff, it's not done under an aviary because the bird is like, I'm going to stay here. I don't want to go out into the wild. I don't want to go get killed by some other bird or some land predator or something. I'm going to stay here. All I have to do is fly around, do some tricks, and I get free food.
Yeah, I'm going to stay where they just give me food and I don't have to hunt or forage or anything.
Animals in a way do that in the wild too. They tend to find a territory, and if like food's easily accessible and there's a little competition, they're staying there because they have no incentive to leave. in real life, in the wild, animals are jerks to each other. You know, you got to stop getting your information from Disney movies, because animals do not give a rat's ass about each other except their own kind.
Speaking of territory, that just reminds me of a study they did in Northern Territory. They studied the moving around habits of saltwater crocodiles. They found some of the largest saltwater crocodiles will travel up to 50 kilometers to get back to the place that you moved them out of.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Moving crocodiles doesn't work. They'll just come back.
Yep. And actually, going back to the whole gun control, I've actually heard from some Australian farmers, gun control makes it a lot harder for farmers to get certain pests off their land, because
we have a massive rabbit problem because of gun control. It's bloody annoying.
The cane toad.
You've heard of the Kubra hats, right? The big Australian hat made out of rabbit fur. We have to import rabbit skins because there aren't enough rabbit hunters. That's just sad.
You also got the cane toad.
Yeah, but those are much harder to actually hunt out and shoot.
I
heard of the cane toad. I think I saw a documentary on that years ago, but I can't remember what it was.
It was brought in to try and control the cane beetle, and then it decided all of the other Australian animals were far tastier.
Yeah, well, that's what happens when you bring in a non-native species.
Yeah, that's
like we were talking about one time. We were talking about California, and this goes back to the water thing we were talking about. And actually, California was like, "Oh, you can't use water. You can't use water." And we were talking about how much water was being used for ecological stuff, including the preservation of 3 different species. 2 of them were endangered species that they were trying to protect. The third was an endangered species they were trying to protect, which was a non-native species that preyed on the other 2.
Yeah.
This just reminds me of the Murray-Darling Basin. It's like, oh no, we have to keep water in the Murray-Darling Basin, which is like the end of the Murray River. Otherwise, it'll go down enough that it's not flowing out into the sea, and that causes problems and blah blah blah. But there's records from 1800s all the way back then of the water going down low enough that it wasn't flowing into the ocean semi-regularly.
There was actually
that was actually the natural order of the Murray River, and now we're keeping it open, which is not actually what it's supposed to do.
Actually, Pipsqueak, I will say this. One thing I read about the cane toad in Australia. The funny thing is that because the cane toad is so used to being immune to killing everything that eats it, that one reason why it's easy to hunt is because if you see a cane toad, a common thing it'll do is that it'll face its back, because that's where its poison glands are, and it'll just stand still. So a lot of Australians say all you got to do is just grab a good golf club and give it a whack. Yeah, no joke. They actually do that. Look it up on YouTube.
Do they put a little hole and aim for it and try and get it there?
No, but I saw a PSAA that was encouraging cane toads.
Don't say that. Someone will start someone will start saying that we invented golf that way.
Yeah, the only difference in Australia is that we use cane toads. Yeah.
Stupid Scottish using the little round balls. Where's the challenge in that? Go for something that can hop away.
I have a gun control related question. Why is it that conservatives understand the gun black market and liberals understand the drug black market, but the 2 sides can't see the other on the thing they disagree with?
Conservatives also don't understand the illegal black market. I mean, they understand, hey, if you make guns illegal, people still get guns. Well, you make, undocumented Mexicans illegal. How are you going to stop them? I mean, a gun will just sit there and wait for you to find it, and Mexican is a person who's kind of clever and can try and evade you and all that.
Yeah.
All right. Any other topics, or are we winding down for the?
Well, going back to the whole control thing. I mean, probably the dumbest argument I ever heard for when people say you got to legalize drugs and you got to make guns legal. And you tell them how the laws don't work, and they refute. Oh, well, does that mean we should have laws that don't longer protect murder? Yeah, that protect murder. Should we make murder legal then? And I'm like, do you not know the difference between murdering someone and buying a bag of pot?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I
speaking of which,
disagree with what you put on your body, but I will fight to the death. Your right to put it there.
It's the difference between rape and lovemaking. You know?
Yep. Yeah, and Shane, actually going back to the whole law thing, I actually was talking about the purge and all that, and I pointed out, you want to know why in real life the purge would not make America richer? Because think of it, you're making all crime legal, so you know what that means? Cyber terrorists are going to have a ball party. Yeah. I actually made a Rick and Morty fanfic where in my fanfic, Rick has an illegitimate son called Griff, and he actually goes to an alternate dimension where the United States does that, and he takes over the United States. Why? Because during the purge, he hacks into all the world accounts and all that, and he transfers all their cash to him. So when the purge is over, people are like, okay, let's see how we're doing. What? They find out they don't have any more assets. They all go to Griff.
Yeah, I don't really think it's the lack of a purge that's stopping them. They seem perfectly willing to break into, all these places, Equifax, the OPM, and things like that.
Yeah.
They get in there.
Well, the purge would make it easier because it's no longer against the law. They no longer have to take the extra steps to try to hide their ID, so they can just...
It depends on how much you're relying on the law and how much you're relying on math.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be relying on math.
Yeah. But as we know, most places don't do that. They rely on the law. They just say, oh, but we have laws that stop, hackers, so therefore we don't have to implement tough security. Oh, what's that? Oh, what's that? Some guy broke into our account, and now 25 million of our customers' personal data is on the black market web. Oh, well, we'll get them next time.
But I mean, as long as you got people like Moxie Marlinspike out there, if you're talking to someone, over Signal and there's the purge, they won't be able to get in there because Signal locks all that down.
Yeah. Not to mention, there's one major paradox every time, and this isn't just with the purge, it's with any place that tries to do the whole crime is all legal. It would be impossible to enforce the crime is all legal law. Want to know why? Because interfering with the purge, that is arresting people who are purging, would therefore be breaking the law. But because all crime's legal...
Yeah, there wouldn't be anything stopping someone from stopping someone else from purging.
Yeah, I actually once thought of a purge fanfic where there's actually a rebel group against the Founding Fathers, and they actually do that. They actually go around and they flat out say anyone who's caught purging will be taken and they'll be placed under arrest, and we will try them, and they will go to prison in our territory based on what they did. Yeah, it's like that whole movie is so stupid. I don't know why it got so popular.
Well, why are the Sharknado movies so popular? I mean, come on.
I know. Last year I went to a Halloween party, and the thing that ruined it was because the guy, he insisted on watching the Sharknado trilogy, and he had Jaws on his necklace. It's like, let's watch Jaws. It's like, but nope, it had to be Sharknado.
There's like 5 of them now.
Yeah. Okay, the first one was kind of one of those so bad it's good movies, but 2 through 5, you're overdoing it.
Are there seriously
it's a cash grab? That's all it is.
Yeah.
Are there seriously 5 Sharknado movies?
Yep.
Yeah. Yep.
Wow.
Still, they're all better than The Force Awakens.
Oh.
Yeah, I will say though, independent films films like that. The reason why I have much greater respect for films like Sharknado versus films like The Force Awakens or a lot of the new movies that Hollywood is coming out with is that at least Sharknado's honest with you. They know we're a stupid, cheesy movie that people watch because we're so bad that they're good. Whereas Hollywood, they're trying to be like, no, this is like this artistic, new, creative approach we're taking, and you just don't get it.
I actually enjoyed The Force Awakens. I just enjoyed it better when it was A New Hope.
Yeah, I just still can't forgive Disney for what they did to the Star Wars expanded universe. It's like, I want to say this, that
the great retcon.
Yep, the great retcon. It's pretty funny because there was actually one guy that flat out pointed out, people said, well, they had to get rid of the expanded universe because there was all these plot holes in it and all that.
No,
but the Disney versus isn't fixing anything. I know, It's pretty funny because people say, I'm a purist, and, it's like, look, I understand the expanded universe had its downsides. There were crappy stories, but here's what I want to say.
Yeah, there were crappy stories, but actually, surprisingly enough, it is, as someone who has actually read quite a lot of novels from the expanded universe, it is really surprising how all of the authors involved made sure not to make plot holes in anybody else's books. It's actually really incredible.
Yeah, and I will say this: I think the reason why Disney retconned it was for one reason and one reason only, and many people have said
so
that.
they can replace it and make their own money.
Yep. Disney does it. That's sadly what Disney does. There was actually what if Disney was honest with you, and the guy pretending to be Bob Iger said, if we get a hold of a story, we're gonna make sure that for the rest of all eternity, the only version people know about is our version.
Well, that's what they've always done with, Snow White and Cinderella and stuff like that.
But here's the thing. Walt Disney had a little bit of passion for his movies, and he still acknowledged the original fact. In fact, some of the original Disney movies actually had little short specials where they gave like little short animations which were more pure to the original stories. But now Disney's all about, okay, let's just take a movie and make it and break it down to the lowest common denominator so it'll sell.
Yeah, and in Walt's defense, you couldn't really put on the screen the wicked stepmother cutting off the stepsister's toes to try and make them fit the shoe.
Or Hansel and Gretel being eaten. A lot of those Brothers Grimm stories were really grim.
Actually, if I recall correctly, in the original Grimm story, Gretel was eaten and Hansel was the one who saw that, and he pushed her in the oven, and that's actually how he found out, was that he witnessed the witch eat his sister, and then he pushes her in. Also, if I recall correctly, in that one, the evil stepmother who forced them out in the begin with, she mysteriously disappears. In the original novel, their father killed her. Yeah, because he basically was like, you forced me to get rid of my own children. You know what? Screw you, I'm killing you. Yeah. And also, if I recall, in the original story of Little Red Riding Hood, the wolf didn't want to eat Little Red Riding Hood. He wanted to have sex with her. Yeah,
Didn't know that.
The wolf was kind of
Oh shit! Can't put that in a children's movie.
Yeah, well, Riding Hood is supposed to be an allegory for a young girl saying, once you get that certain age, there's going to be bad wolves out there that are going to say, hey, lady, you want to come back to my place, maybe drink some whiskey and all that? And they're trying to tell you, you got to learn to stay away from them.
Yeah, that was kind of the point of it, telling girls to, stay away from people like the big bad wolf.
Yeah.
He's going to offer you goodies, and then he's going to,
It's actually where a lot of the Brothers Grimm stories come from. It's like the Brothers Grimm didn't write these. They were sort of all of these folk tales. They took all those sort of folk tales that had a lot in common to each other and put them into a single story. And a lot of these were just pretty much spread orally around as as sort of fables and such. Yeah,
I mean, stories like Little Red Riding Hood and all that, they're similar stories, like they're not exactly the same, but but we have stories that are similar to that, dating back to like ancient Rome, ancient Greece, and even ancient Egypt, and they were just passed on, through millennia by people from around the world. It's just all the brothers.
Well, in a lot of ways, that's what Shakespeare was doing, because Hamlet was based on a Scandinavian story of Amleth. You just move the H around to the other end, and the difference is Amleth actually not only marries his version of Ophelia, he also ends up marrying the Princess of England and has children with both of them, and then kills his uncle and all the rest of the nobles in a big fire, and then rules the world with an iron fist. So
yeah, Hysteria did this, and Hysteria gets a lot of stuff wrong, but one thing they did was pretty funny was when they were talking Shakespeare, and like 90% of they were doing a song all about Shakespeare, 90% of the plays they say, and everyone dies. That is true. I mean, seriously.
Well, it's just the tragedies, really. They don't die much in the comedies.
Yeah, Shakespeare was the original George R.R. Martin, Oh, what's this? You think Romeo and Juliet have a complicated character and you want to see more stories? Okay. Oh, they committed murder-suicide. They're dead.
But that's just going back to the Greek tragedies, and Romeo and Juliet goes all the way back to Pyramus and Thisbe.
Yeah, it's pretty funny because a lot of people defend George R.R. Martin by saying, well, that's more realistic because in real life people die regardless of whether or not. But here's the thing: the key to storytelling is that you don't kill off a character unless one of two criteria are met. The story can be advanced with them dying, or there's really nothing more for them to do, and it's better if they exit the story somehow. And that's what a lot of people complain about with George R.R. Martin is that he kills them off, just when they're getting interesting, and now any plot elements that could have gone with them are gone with them,
Yeah.
Like everyone wants to know who's Jon Snow's mother, what's his family and all that, but Jon Snow's dead, so no one cares anymore.
Well, they brought him back in the show, so.
Yeah, it's like that's a common complaint I hear about people with Game of Thrones is that like even with the books, it's like so many people are dying. It's just like, well, I can't get attached to the story because there's no characters to attach. Because every time I get attached to them, 2 chapters later, they get stabbed in the back and die. Even South Park made fun of that.
I mean, I could understand everyone hates him. Everyone hates him for killing Ned Stark, but that one I can actually understand because Ned would have been able to hold everything together, and without Ned, everything starts falling apart, and then you have the story being driven. But
yeah, but
it doesn't really help, especially because Game of Thrones is. It's actually a novella about political intrigue that all of the you can't just keep killing all of the interesting characters, otherwise there's no political intrigue,
Yeah. Oh, we still got Tyrion, we still got Dany, we still got Jaime.
For now, College Humor back when they were funny made a parody of George R.R. Martin. It's like you think about maybe Tyrion and Davos might take a little dive off a cliff. Yeah, like that,
Well, there's only one season left anyway, so we'll have to see how many.
The funniest part is that he holds a plate of nachos. And he says, "Every plot and complaint you want me to do is a plate of nachos, and each one is a story I won't write. And my arteries aren't gonna burst for another 2 books." Yeah. Yeah, I'm not a really good story writer, but I agree George R.R. Martin doesn't really know how to edit stories, It seems like his solution, every time he comes across a complicated solution, is, let's just kill off the character and just move on to a different one then.
Yeah.
It's like, you can't do that.
He doesn't really want it to go organically.
Yeah,
Because, there have been plenty of times where writers have introduced a character fully intending to kill off that character, and that character's just ended up working out so well. It's like, no, I'm going to keep that.
Oh, yeah. Actually, here's the thing. Going back to The Force Awakens, and spoiler for anyone who saw it, Han Solo dies in the end, It's pretty funny because everyone was because
there was no reason for.
Yeah, it was done for one reason and one reason only. That's because Harrison Ford doesn't like Han Solo.
Harrison Ford wanted Han Solo to die in Episode 5.
Yeah, he thought. Yeah,
that was supposed to be the moment where he actually died.
Yeah, but in all honesty, it's good that they brought Han Solo back because let's face it, the story couldn't go on without him.
Yeah, but if it had been like a complication, like now, who's going to fly the Millennium Falcon and how are we going to do all of that? But no, we got instant Mary Sue replacement.
Yeah, yeah, that's another thing. People are actually, believe it or not, the actress who played Rey, she did call people saying, if you call Rey a Mary Sue, then you're a feminist, I'm not against a strong female character, but she's got to be a character,
Yeah, real characters are flawed.
Yeah, like Elaine Ripley, she wasn't like this Mary Sue who could do everything right away.
Or Katniss Everdeen.
Yeah,
But even if you look like, oh, she's just like Luke Skywalker. Oh, for crying out loud. How many times did Luke Skywalker lose and fail and have to be rescued by Han Solo, have to be rescued by Princess Leia, have to be rescued by R2-D2? They couldn't even allow her to have to be rescued once. She had to escape and meet halfway.
Yeah, it's pretty funny because one person...
Or even have to be rescued by some random NPC supporting character. It wasn't always the main characters.
Can I say that? Can I say this, Pipsqueak? And it's another thing because people like to compare the duel between Rey and Kylo Ren. But Luke, battled Darth Vader at had Bison, and he held off. But here's the thing: that's because Vader was holding back, because his mission wasn't to kill Luke; it was to capture him and bring him back to the Emperor.
Well, and even then, even at the end of the second movie, he's not ready to fight him. He loses his hand.
Yeah,
he ends up diving, off the thing to avoid him.
You can tell for the first half of that fight, Vader is basically toying with him. And then when Vader goes all out, it is absolutely clear that Skywalker is completely outmatched.
Yeah, it's pretty clear. A lot of people have pointed out, you can tell just by their stances. Vader for the first half is fighting Luke almost like a fencer, whereas Luke's putting like his full energy into it, which a lot of sword fighters say that's a huge mistake to do in sword fighting.
Yeah, because you just tire yourself out.
Yeah, the thing about sword fighting is that, contrary to what a lot of TV shows like to portray, it's not about who's strongest. It's all about getting in fast, accurate, and quickly.
Yeah, and with that fight, like the first half, Luke's actually being the aggressive one in that fight. He's the one advancing, and Vader's actually backing up.
Yeah,
so you can
and remember, Luke's his son. He doesn't want to kill his son.
Yeah. And not to mention the, even with the scene where he did chop off Luke's hand, Luke in that scene was wide exposed, and Vader easily could have just killed him right there. But no, he just went for his hand, and then he's like, this fight's over, Luke. You should join me and, become stronger. That's what happened,
Yep.
Yeah. And also, I'm sorry, but I really do not like Kylo Ren as a character. I am so pissed off that I see all these people draw fan art of him. Kylo Ren is a terrible villain, people.
I kind of see Kylo Ren, them making the stakes with him that they made with Anakin Skywalker in the second trilogy. There were all sorts of really interesting ways that you could have turned him over to the dark side, ways that make sense, ways that you could see, a good person, innocently falling into, and they just went for the easy tripe way.
And
it's like they wanted to write a different story, and then they get to the last page and go, "Oh shit, this is a Star Wars movie."
Yeah, actually, Shane, I actually read an interesting point, which I agree with, is that when you think about it, the scene in Episode 3 where Anakin was telling Mace Windu, "No, we can't kill the Emperor." In a way, Anakin's correct, because he's the Dark Lord of the Sith, but he's still technically Chancellor of the Republic. If the Jedi just went in, lightsabers ablazing, and chopped them off, what is that going to look like to the Galactic Republic? That's going to look like, oh my God, the Jedi staged a coup d'etat. What they should have done, in my personal opinion, is that they should have.
It also goes back to the morality question right at the start of the movie with who was it? God, his name escapes.
Talking about when Han shot Greedo?
No, not that one. That was the same movie. It was when Palpatine orders Anakin to kill the Sith on the observation deck. Sorry, his name has just escaped me.
Dooku,
yes, Count Dooku.
Or Darth Tyrannus, depending on whichever. They always called him Dooku, but officially he's Darth Tyrannus. Yeah.
Yeah, but but the whole, Greedo shot first thing is the same kind of thing, because originally when it's just Han shooting Greedo, that establishes Han as a rogue, and it makes the whole thing a redemption story. He goes from being a rogue to being a hero. If Greedo shoots first, you lose that whole element of it.
Yeah. And actually, Shane, I created my own Sith Lord character, and I thought, even though I still think the original EU is canon in my personal opinion, I actually thought of my own idea where it's going to be how, the Disney rewrite should have been, and I actually created my own character called Darth Imperius.
Oh, you've cut out.
Yeah.
Really powerful character to the point where he can defeat most of the Jedi Master. But here's the thing: it took him years of training to get to that stage. One of my friends, said, "Oh well, he's just no more Mary Suish than Rey is." But here's the thing: Rey learned everything instantly, whereas Imperius, it took him years of training. And it's even established in my story several times that Imperius, still has a lot to learn, and he's still reckless, and he does have a flaw.
Well, and always keep in mind when you're writing bad guys, no one considers themselves to be bad. No one sets out to be bad. No one's evil just because they're evil or whatever. There's a whole story in their head that makes sense. Everyone's the hero of his own story.
Yeah, Imperius flat out says that. He flat out tells, Luke, look, I didn't join the Sith to destroy the Jedi. He actually flat out says, one thing he's going to do differently is that unlike the Sith who want to kill all the Jedi, he actually, in a way, comes to the conclusion, look, the Force needs the Sith and the Jedi, and he thinks basically his grand scheme is when he unites the galaxy is the Sith will be the leaders, but the Jedi will still be allowed, but they have to be compliant to the Sith. He thinks of that balance.
Chris, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you think Star Wars is better off in the hands of Disney than George Lucas?
I think it was better off in George Lucas. Really the problem with George Lucas wasn't that
70s and 80s George Lucas or 21st century George Lucas?
Actually, yeah, that's an excellent point because
the problem with George Lucas wasn't exactly that he was bad. It was just that he got a little too carried away, and he just needed that one person to say, Lucas, that's a great idea, but I think it would be much better if we edited it like this. That's what he needed.
Well, that's why it was always better when he turned over the writing or the directing.
With yes men.
Yeah.
Yeah. When he turned over the writing or directing to someone else, and he was just kind of like, the ideas man. This is what Tarantino said that he learned from Terry Gilliam, because Terry Gilliam was kind of his mentor. And, Tarantino was all like, well, how do you do this? How do you do the lighting? How do you do the effects? And Gilliam was like, you don't do any of those things. You hire people who know how to do those things, and you have them do it.
Yeah. And my biggest
problem, just tell them what your vision is, but then you rely on their expertise to bring it through in an artful way.
And my problem is with Disney is that Disney sees Star Wars more as the problem is that they're treating Star Wars like a cash grab. It's like with George Lucas, yeah, a lot of his decisions were stupid, but you still saw the passion in there. With Disney, it's more like okay, what's gonna sell? What's gonna sell? And don't get me wrong, I'm all pro capitalism and all that, but with movies and video games, you got to be careful because you can't take this corporate approach to it. Because a movie and a video game has to entertain, and in order to entertain, you got to connect with the audience. And when you take this corporate approach, you take that away because, again, that's the biggest problem with The Force Awakens is that it was pretty clearly, a stereotypical Hollywood movie. Like it has all the things you can see and all that, and it just feels so artificial,
Well, this comes back to a lot of what happens in capitalism. People keep saying, "Oh, but the big companies will dominate." It's like the big companies are too inagile to dominate. It's like you have someone that's, for example, making cars, and there's a serious market shift. It will cost an inordinate amount of money for the big company to change its production lines in order to keep up.
And again,
that's another problem that you have with things like DRM and the DMCA and all this copyright bugosity. Google was started by two guys and a computer that wasn't really all that powerful. And they had in the garage, they had Yahoo, they had Alta Vista. I don't know how many people have even heard of Alta Vista nowadays, but it dominated at the time. Then Google comes along, two guys and a computer, and just do everything. But what if you tried to do your own Google now to out-Google Google? Well, you'd have to spend billions of dollars trying to make arrangements with all of these media companies about how you're going to take down links to infringing contents and things like that. You can do it now.
Oh yeah, the startup costs have been massively inflated. It's a lot like all of these safety regulations with car manufacturing stuff. You can't create a new car company because there's so many safety regulations that it would be inordinately expensive just to make your first design or prototype.
And one of the reasons why there's all of these supplement things that people are complaining about is because if you want to do a startup pharmaceutical company, you can't just start up saying, okay, we're going to make medication to go on the shelves. How on earth are you going to get the money for it? You have to start off doing something else like making supplements or whatever until you get up the capital to be able to do it. You can't really be a true pharmaceutical startup. You have to start doing something else.
Get that slice of the market share, build up a reputation that, yes, you know what you're doing and this will not make you sick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's pretty funny because I was watching a video about the fall of the movie.
You cut out again, Chris.
Problem. One guy said that Disney was hanging in there because they were listening to the customers and hiring good, and I just had to laugh at that. I'm like, buddy, if Disney listened to his customers, the Star Wars expanded universe would still be okay, and they would still be making 2D animation films.
Oh, I mean the 3D stuff. 3D stuff is good when they turn it over to Pixar.
Yeah.
But I mean, when they're trying to do, when they're trying to be George Lucas, let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
And George Lucas was not, the greatest director ever by any stretch of the imagination. But even when they're just trying to do something on the level of George Lucas, it doesn't really work out that well.
Yeah, and again, a lot of people have pointed this out. Disney makes more of its money through merchandising and through suing people than they do through making good movies nowadays.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually the reason why.
Well, there's like the occasional good movies, like Frozen was actually good. I mean, yeah, it got overplayed, but it was good. But for every Frozen, look at how many movies a year Disney puts out.
Yeah, like you see those cheesy little CGI movies that you can clearly see the plot go all a mile away just from a 2-minute trailer. That's another thing that people always love to say is they always say you can't judge a movie by the trailer. I know from firsthand experience, yes, you can.
Yeah, you can when the trailer gives away almost all of the good bits.
That's not always true, though, because I remember seeing the trailer for The Iron Giant thinking, oh, that's going to be this stupid little movie about this kid and his giant robot friend. It's not going to do anything. And then someone got it for my son for Christmas, and my policy was always I won't let my kids watch something unless I watch it first. And I sat down and watched it, and damn, that is an awesome movie.
It is.
You never get that from the trailer. You would never get that from the trailer.
Oh, yeah.
Princess Bride is the same way. See if you can find a good trailer for The Princess Bride that lets you know how awesome that movie is.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's the thing is that, the trailer should make you want to see the movie,
Yeah, but some movies, I guess, they just don't trailerize that well because it's more about, long sweeping things than it is little, sound bites you can put in.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of modern day movie trailers are following the Rob Schneider policy. Basically, I got the joke from South Park where basically if you were to take a trailer and replace all the words with derpity derp and derp and occasionally the movie title, you can tell where it's going, that's a sign that you're doing it wrong. Because that's a reference to how Rob Schneider comedies were all the same. So they're always saying, Rob Schneider does derp to derp. Then he goes derpity derp. And then he goes derpity derpy derp-a-dumb.
Yeah, and it was all like Rob Schneider turns into a carrot. Rob Schneider turns into a stapler and all that sort of stuff.
And then he turns into Kenny.
Yeah, and then dies on the flagpole.
Shane, you're a technical guy. At what point do you think, like 4K and beyond, will the pixels can't get any smaller to where like our eyes can't tell the difference between?
I actually saw something on this. Oh, who was it from? It was the guy who did AVS forums, and I'm drawing a blank on his name, but he did this thing where, I mean, it's a function of two things. It's the size of the screen and how far away you are from it. And in order to start noticing the pixels on a 4K screen, if you're sitting, like I think it was 10 or 15 feet away or something like that, the screen basically needed to be the size of the wall.
Yeah.
But I mean, he gives you this for, I think it was 10 or 15 feet away or something like that. The size of the screen, has to be for different resolutions before
I've actually met a few computer programmers that nowadays they laugh whenever time a TV or a video game advertises like how many bits or bytes their TV can do, because with today's technology, stuff like that doesn't 100% matter anymore.
Well, and I think once you go 4K, the pixel density isn't really what matters. It's stuff like, you want the high dynamic range. You want to be able to really get a lot of motion in there without a lot of blur or tearing or things like that.
Yeah, so many companies like to advertise their stuff so much. I mean, like I've already cracked my iPhone a couple times, and a lot of people have pointed this out to me. Those expensive cases, if all the phone companies would just stop making their devices so damn thin.
Yeah, what is it? I mean, why does this is with a case on? Why does it need to be this thin? And then they wonder why batteries are exploding.
Yeah. I think he did a Bıᴛᴇᴏ podcast on that, like that, and the reason was because like their batteries were exploding, and it was discovered that partially the reason was because the phone is so thin and so small that the heat builds up real quicker, and thus it leads to a fire. And again, the biggest problem is that, like, I understand wanting to make the phone, you know, compact, but like it's like we're gonna make our phone so thin it's like paper. It's like,
but J.D. Power and Associates.
And the case is aluminium, so when you put it in your skinny jean pocket, it bends into a nice arse-shaped curve.
But J.D. Power and Associates did a survey on all that, and they found out that less than 15 millimeters, people don't care how thin it is. At that point, they're more concerned by battery life. So make a thicker phone, give them a bigger battery.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you know, you're talking about that one episode of Bugosity. If you just search for that, you don't even have to listen to the episode in that case. Just follow that link, because that link does a beautiful job of explaining technically how batteries work and what the issue is and how that happens.
Yeah, that is one problem with the tech industry these days, is that they're so obsessed with making it look cool that they're forgetting, oh, is this going to be practical, you know?
Well, and this was the thing that Samsung kind of found out, because they were caught so flat-footed by that, they were thinking, okay, the batteries we just bought them from the wrong people. Let's buy them from these other people, the same people who make the batteries for iPhones. And then the same thing kept happening. And that's kind of not just Samsung, but everyone else started thinking, okay, we need to stop thinking about batteries as something that we just buy and put into the device, and thinking of it as a part of the overall design and how it works and how it all goes together and what the issues are.
Yeah, that's the thing that people fail to realize. You know, you got to look at, you can't just, I will say this to Shane. I told this to many people. I think the biggest problem with and I blame the government for causing this, mostly because it's causing people that, is the biggest problem with today, and why a lot of businesses are doing so badly, is because they're always obsessed with looking in the short run, that they're never, that, to quote Master Yoda, they're never thinking about what they're doing now and what they're. They never look at what they're. Oh, they're not looking at what they're doing now and how it's going to affect them in the long run.
Steve Gibson talks about all the time about how hard drives are getting more and more storage capacity at the expense of the quality of the hard drive.
But I mean, people are always like, oh, well, capitalist companies, they're just out for a profit. They don't look into the long-term future. Okay, well, how do you explain, like, Dom Perignon or Johnny, whatever that is, that Scotch company, they make things that are not going to sell for 20 or 50 or 100 years from now. Because you want to make, 20-year-old Scotch, then it's got to sit somewhere for 20 years and you don't get to sell it until then. Johnny Walker, that's what I was thinking of. I'm not an alcohol guy, so I don't really know. But yeah, I mean, it just sits around for decades.
Yeah, or any of the wineries that we have here in the Barossa Valley.
Speaking of wine,
Shane, for at least a few years.
And speaking of wine, Shane, I told you this. There's actually a law that's actually enforced in some countries that flat out says you cannot advertise an alcohol product as champagne unless it's made from Champagne, France.
Right.
Yeah, even though all champagne is, as many people pointed out, all it is a dry, sparkling white wine. Yeah, but it's like, look, I made this product. It's the exact same thing. It's been proven in a double-blind taste test that people can't tell the difference. What makes it different from your bread? It's like,
actually,
it isn't even a brand name. It's a location.
Yeah.
Actually, speaking of,
it would be like saying McDonald's, you cannot advertise hamburgers unless they're made in Hamburg, Germany.
Yep. Or you can't advertise cheddar cheese unless it's made from Cheddar Gorge, England.
Oh, God. Actually, a funny story. I was actually holidaying in Finland about, what was it now, 4 or 5 years ago? And we're pottering around, one of the tourist spots up there. I think it was, that fortified island right outside Helsinki. And a truck drives past us. And I'm like, hang on, I know that logo. And it was a truck transporting wines from the Barossa Valley. I was absolutely, it's like, oh, they're selling South Australian wine in Finland.
Okay, well, I'm not an alcohol guy, but... I don't really get the significance there, but
I think alcohol is a filthy substance.
just tastes horrible. I've never liked the taste of it.
Yeah,
I've always been one of those, like in college, they'll say, "Oh, we'll mix you a drink where you won't even taste the alcohol." I could taste the alcohol.
Yeah,
How did we learn?
I will say, when Family Guy was funny, I love that one historical museum where they figured out what humankind looked like before the invention of alcohol. And like we're this like, Jetsons like you society where like we're clean, we're energy efficient, we're self-sufficient, and then some guy comes along and says, "Hey, some guy just invented something in his basement, whiskey," and then we drink it and then we all turn into wild party animals.
How did we wise up to alcohol prohibition but not the same for like weed?
What are you asking there, Darth?
Because we've been drinking alcohol for a hell of a lot longer.
Yeah.
No, we've been smoking weed for tens of thousands of years.
Yeah. Yep, I don't know why.
At least,
I don't know why humans are. Yeah.
Sorry.
It's a weird thing. I don't know why humans are obsessed with consuming products that make their mind go funny.
But I mean, the banning of it is just about control, and it's all about dehumanizing something you enjoy. Drinking, drugs, sex, whatever. That means there's something wrong with you, and you need to be controlled. That's what governments have done, and that's what religions have done.
I actually thought about.
The thing about beer is like in the medieval era, most water sources were contaminated in one way or another, so it was actually much safer drinking beer than it was to actually drink water, and it often tasted better.
That's why it was such a miracle in the Bible, Jesus turning the water into wine, because when you drank water, you were at a real risk of having some kind of contamination tainted by some disease or something. But wine was safe, so if you can just turn the water into wine, then you're good.
Yeah, actually, Shane, I saw this funny but I actually thought of this funny joke one time where a scientist develops the ultimate cure for alcoholism because he really hates alcohol, but he figured out a way about how he can destroy the market for alcohol without actually banning alcohol. You know what that is? He invents a chemical substance that when you inject it into a person, it messes up their metabolism so they can't get drunk. So they can still drink, but they can't get drunk. And when he gives it to people, it's like, so I can still drink. Yeah, but why do you drink so much? Then they're like, damn it, no, there's no point to drinking.
Well, I mean, there are people who enjoy a glass of wine with dinner or something like that. That's not going to get them drunk.
Yeah,
they just enjoy drinking it for some bizarre reason.
Yeah, well, his cure was more aimed at the people they get drunk they drink for the sole purpose of getting drunk.
Yeah.
I'm just glad to see. I think we're changing our minds about marijuana in this country, and I'm hopeful for more freedom in that sense.
I hope so, but I'm kind of worried because the thing about it is people say, oh, well, we should legalize marijuana because it's so safe. Once we do that, how much of an impediment is there going to be to legalizing the other drugs? Because people are like, well, they're not safe. And I keep making the argument, well, that's a better reason to legalize them. But, that's not, if that's not the momentum the direction is going in, it should be going in the direction of it's your body. You get to decide what you put into it.
Yeah. I will say this.
Hang on, and legalizing it would actually still make it more safe because you would take it out of the black market. And I read a story recently of someone injecting what they thought was heroin, but it was actually a sort of like fake heroin that originated in Russia or something, and it's a really, really nasty chemical compound that eats away at your flesh or something like that.
Crocodile?
It was some acronym or something, but I knew it came out of Russia, but it looks exactly like heroin, and it's sold on the black market to make a quick buck off of addicts. And
Pipsqueak, it's called Crocodile.
Oh, that's what it's called. Okay.
Yeah, Crocodile. It's like a pseudo heroin that they take by mixing certain chemicals from cleaners and all that, and it gets the name because it does that. It makes your skin all dry and scaly.
I mean, the thing is, when you take a dangerous substance and put it in the hands of the black market, all of the decisions about the marketing and distribution, how strong it's going to be, what it's going to be made with, what it's going to be cut with, how it's distributed, how much is it going to sell for, where are you going to sell it, and who are you going to sell it to. All of those decisions are now going to be made by criminals. And if they say, okay, we're going to sell these big dangerous drugs to our kids on playgrounds, that's what's going to happen.
Yep,
I mean, the war on drugs just does so much more harm than the actual drugs. It's completely
it forces people who want the drugs or who are addicted to the drugs to associate with murderers and thieves.
Yep.
That's all you're doing.
Actually, my friend Jason told me one time he was on vacation. He was on vacation in England one time, and he actually came across a milk bar that was made in the style of a Clockwork Orange, the Corova milk bar, and they sold Milk Plus, believe it or not, and it was actually milk that was laced with mostly harmless stuff. Like there was it usually had caffeine, but it also had things like drinkable, like liquid tobacco. It had like a bunch of chemicals that are found in over-the-counter drugs, stuff like that. And people do, and they did have a little notice saying, "Sorry, do not ask. We do not have milk-laced marijuana. We are sorry. We just it's not legal in England, so we can't offer it." Yeah, and it was perfectly legal, although there was an age limit. But yeah,
I mean, it's amazing. Tell people that in 1913, an 8-year-old could walk into a drugstore and buy heroin and cocaine and watch them look at you funny.
Yep. Yeah, and actually it's pretty funny because Jason actually met one of the owners, and they asked him, like, how do you get away with this in England? It says, well, it turns out you can sell milk that's laced with drugs. All you need with these certain drugs, all you need is a pharmacy's license, and I have that. Yeah. So that's what he said. All you need is a pharmacist's license.
Yeah, I don't think pharmacists in the U.S. actually mix drugs anymore. I think it all has to be done by the pharmaceutical companies.
Well, I don't know. There was some sort of loophole that he took advantage that made it legal. So, basically what the authorities told him is that as long as it's not the illegal stuff and it's and the levels are of a relatively harmless level, then it's perfectly fine.
I mean, it used to be, and I think it might still be this way in a lot of countries. The doctor would say, okay, this person needs so many milligrams of this drug and that drug and whatever. And the pharmacist will have bought those from the pharmaceutical companies, but will take them and, grind them up and mix them together and put them in the proper pill form or whatever. The pharmacist would do all that.
Yeah. Yep. And regulations, I think, killed that, right?
At least in the U.S. Yeah.
And actually, believe it or not, I've actually remember reading, going back to that's partially why the cyanide and the Tylenol tablets happened, was because, if you see a pharmacist fill it up, you kind of sort of have an idea of what's going in there. Whereas if it's at the factory, some disgruntled employee could put something nasty in there and you wouldn't know it.
Well, that wasn't even done at the factory. That might have even been done after it was purchased. People really don't know.
Yeah, they don't know. Yeah, they never caught the guy.
But it wasn't done at the source, they know that. But this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about trying to do a pharmaceutical startup. Even if you do something that is just, like an antibiotic or something like that, it's already passed all the FDA testing, and and you say, okay, I want to sell that. Well, you still have to get your version of it, even if it's the same drug with the same dosage and everything. You don't have to go through the full slate of it, but you still have to go through the FDA because they have to approve of everything, including what the filler is and what form it's in and whatever.
Yeah, Shane, I've actually heard that going back to government regulations. Regulations are what keeps us away from good medicine. I actually heard somewhere that, we actually, in theory, could have, quote unquote antibiotics, for viruses, like not exactly antibiotics, but it's like
antibiotics.
Well, they're not. I'm just calling them that because I don't know what the term is, but they're like ribavirin, which is the only one we have, and they're being killed because of that.
Well, I mean, with the way we're going, they say we've only got 50 years worth of use out of our existing antibiotics left, but it's so difficult to research a new antibiotic that all of the FDA requirements and everything on top of that are basically making it impossible.
Yeah,
but I mean, understand that when we lose the ability to use these antibiotics, it's not just like, oh, you've got a sinus infection, so you can't do the surgeries will be almost impossible. They rely on broad spectrum antibiotics to keep infections to coming from surgery. I mean, that could throw us back to the 19th century as far as a lot of surgery is concerned.
Doesn't help that we have all those anti-vaxxers nowadays too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are thinking, okay, well, let's look at let's look at something called bacteriophages. The thing is, bacteriophages are specific. Like you can make a bacteriophage for surgery that goes specifically against Staphylococcus, but they're not broad spectrum like antibiotics are.
Yeah.
One of the things that pissed me
terror
off
stores or whatnot, the deadly disease is always a virus and all that. And Jason's father-in-law is always laughing at those movies because it's always like, it's always a virus. And they always say the virus can do this, the virus can do that. And they clearly don't know what it is. In fact, he actually says, personally, the most deadliest diseases in the world are caused by bacteria. And people always say, but can't bacteria be cured by antibiotics? And he actually replied to one person saying, okay, then you take penicillin while you have a MRSA infection and see how that goes.
Well, because different antibiotics have different mechanisms, but also it's so easy for them to evolve a resistance. We need to be able to make better broad-spectrum antibiotics, and like you said, we need some really good broad-spectrum antivirals. Yeah,
you know, I mean, and actually, believe it or not, I've actually heard that government regulation is the reason why ribavirin isn't used a whole lot, because potentially it could, you know, save lives. I mean, if someone has a really bad flu, they could in theory use it to cure the flu, but no, the government is so terrified. But what if all these diseases mutate so they're resistant to ribavirin? So now they only save it for things like Ebola or Lassa fever.
Yeah, I mean, if you make it easier for people to develop antivirals, I mean, they've got it, I think, with retrovirus, the antiretrovirals they have, which are primarily used to treat HIV. But I mean, they're really well, and I think they're able to actually close off enough evolutionary pathways that it doesn't really have much of a chance to evolve a resistance to it.
Even then, you would think that you would trust the medical professional who's prescribing the antiviral to prescribe the right dose for the right length than the government.
A government that has never examined you, doesn't know anything about your, condition or anything.
Jason's father-in-law said, the thing with viruses is that, contrary to popular belief, viruses aren't that difficult. And the thing with viruses isn't that isn't actually the virus itself. Rather, it's the protein that surrounds the virus. That's the tricky part,
Yeah, that's what you target, and that's like this is a lie the anti-vaxxers will tell you. They'll say, "Oh, well, the measles vaccine only works against one strain, and there are like 19 strains of measles." No, it works against all 19 because when the vaccine works and when your body makes antibodies against it, it doesn't do a DNA test or an RNA test to look at the actual genetic code. It's that protein coding that it's coming around. And the reason why that doesn't work with the flu is because that outer coating of proteins is so different between the different strains.
Yep. And
but with measles, they're pretty much all the same. So one vaccine gets all of them.
That's what he said. He said the viroid, which is the part that infiltrates your cell and, forces it to make copies of itself, doesn't actually really do anything. It can't evolve or anything because it's not alive. It's the protein coat that does the mutating.
Well, it's got to have some way of entering your cell and tricking your cell machinery into doing the job of replicating the virus.
Yeah. And that's another thing too, is that a lot of zombie movies like to portray viruses as being self-sentient, and they're not.
I still think I could make a kick-ass zombie movie. I mean, it all depends on characters, really. But I'm thinking about there's this one parasite that infects, I think it's crabs, and it grows all inside the crab and in all its limbs, and then it sticks its head out the top and takes over the crab. So that's my idea of a zombie, is something like that for humans. This fibrous stuff that wraps around your bones. At some point, it kills you, and then it's kind of lumbering around. But then it learns, and it becomes fast. And, I mean, the lumbering zombie isn't that scary to me. It's like, quick, let's escape at a brisk trot. But if they can run, and even if they can do like a gestalt where they've got like 5 or 6 human skeletons together covered with this fibrous mess, and it's this big monster coming at you, that'd be a good zombie movie right there.
Yeah, and it's pretty funny about how zombies are always portrayed as, the infection spreads and there's nothing we can do about it. And I'm like, the reason why that happens, like in The Walking Dead, is like because nobody did anything. I mean, in The Walking Dead, there were scenes where they're visiting abandoned military outposts. There's tanks, helicopters, all of which are fully fueled and fully armed. And you're just wondering, what's the army doing when the zombies came? They actually talked to the Pentagon, and they said that contrary to how a lot of movies like to portray it in real life, a zombie apocalypse would be completely easy to eradicate.
Yeah, but see, my ideas of zombie would be more like fighting the Terminator.
Yeah.
So I always find
it's
the quintessential zombie movie a bit funny, because if you actually look at the original lore of where zombies originally came from, it was something like they used a mind-damaging drug to suppress the higher brain functions of people and actually turn them into slaves, and that's what was originally called zombies.
Yeah, zombies were not living dead creatures that feed off the flesh and spread whatever zombie virus. They're just people who have basically lost their mind and they're under control of something else.
Actually, I think originally it was just that they had regressed to their more animalistic tendencies because they didn't have any higher brain functions.
Yeah. And I still find it funny about how a lot of zombie movies portray that only shooting the head will kill the zombie, and that the virus will take care of everything else. It's like, how,
Don't work with my zombies.
Yeah, it's pretty. And again, going back there,
$30 million to make a zombie movie.
Yeah,
I can do
it's
that.
pretty funny. It's pretty funny with a zombie virus, because a common explanation is always that, well, the virus causes the cells to regenerate. And Jason's father-in-law actually saw a movie like that one time, and he's like, viruses don't do that. They destroy cells.
Yep.
Yeah, what they do is that they infiltrate a cell and they force it to replicate itself, and eventually the cell will die, and all that will be left are the copies of the viruses. So in the long run, like, let's say if the virus was allowed to live, unopposed, eventually the zombie would just be a bunch of goo on the floor, because all of its cells would be destroyed.
Well, actually, there are, that's just the bad viruses. Like bacteria, there's a lot of symbiotic viruses that we rely on to stay alive.
Yeah, that's another thing too. Not all viruses are bad. In fact, the modern-day human mitochondria was found. It was proven that it was founded when bacteria and viruses attacked our cells, but instead of destroying them, they merged together.
Yep. But I mean, even now, the non-human part of your microbiome outweighs, and provides a greater number of genes than your human cells.
And that's another theme that in a lot of those biomedical thrills that Jason's father-in-law can't understand, because he's a biochemist. Is like they're always saying, well, we're going to use a virus to treat this illness. And it's always something like, okay, we're going to take Ebola or influenza or measles and we're going to modify it to fight this illness. And he's like, there's thousands of symbiotic viruses that would be much safer to use.
Well, they're actually doing that with HIV, though. Because the thing is, it's real easy to take out the bad parts of HIV, but it's such an efficient retrovirus that you can cure a genetic disease by taking the good genetic sequence for the gene, inserting it into the viral genome, and then you give it to the person, and it goes in and actually replaces their own genome and gives them the good copy of the gene.
But again, as you pointed out, HIV is a relatively stable virus. Viruses like the flu or measles are not. They can mutate on a second. It's
HIV is very mutagenic. Yeah, it's incredibly mutagenic.
But still, it's always got to be the nasty virus that's going to do like that. And Jason's father-in-law, when at the place where he works at, they do stuff like that. But here's the thing, here's the thing. His own supervisor flat out says, if you come up to me and you say, I think we can treat, prionic illnesses by using modified Ebola viruses, you're going to get slapped in the face and kicked out. Because, in theory, we can use viruses to attack prions, but a virus like Ebola would be out of the question.
HIV, you would think, from all the problems that it causes, there would be this horrible virus. It's actually not that bad. The problems with HIV come from the fact that it has to disable the human immune system to survive. It's very good at doing that, and that leaves you susceptible to all these other infections. John Stossel once got criticized a long time ago because he criticized that we were a little too scared about AIDS and we were overfunding AIDS and HIV when there were all these other diseases like cancers that were getting underfunded. Yeah, but cancer is a whole other animal in and of itself.
Well, yeah, it's pretty funny because, there's so many people that still believe the whole myth, there's a universal cure for cancer, but people aren't releasing it because they can't make money off of it. No, the reason there's no universal cure for cancer is because there's no singular cause for cancer.
There's not even one single kind of cancer. There's all sorts of different...
Yeah, and each cancer, and each cancer is unique to the person who has it,
There is a universal cure for cancer. It's called finding it early enough and cutting the damn thing out.
Well, even that has problems, though.
Well, yeah.
Well, yeah, the whole
Well,
which is
one
why you need
big
to find it
problem that
earlier.
we're having nowadays is because we're finding too many cancers too early, and you're treating all sorts of cancers that are never, ever going to be a problem. You're doing all these invasive things to the person's body to deal with it, and you're causing far more damage than you're solving.
yeah, you know.
Is it true that oftentimes doctors won't remove bullets because it could trying to get the bullet out would cause more damage than?
That's
Yep.
true. That whole thing you see in the movies where they're pulling the bullets out one by one and you hear them go tink, tink, tink in the metal bowl, that's fiction.
Nope.
Unless the bullet is in a specific place that's going to cause problems, they leave it there.
Oh, yeah.
Do more damage cutting it out.
Much like
Yeah.
first aid with knife wounds, you want to leave the knife in because that actually provides a barrier that prevents blood from actually coming out.
Well,
It's
and
much
also
more
your skin
dangerous
is
to
going to
remove a knife.
naturally, your skin and your flesh are naturally going to swell up around it and cut it off. And so, yeah, you'd want to leave it there until the emergency personnel or the surgeon or whoever
Yeah,
can
if-
take
if
it
you-
out
if
in a
you-
controlled environment where they can control the bleeding and everything.
Yeah, if you're doing
Yeah.
first aid, you usually just pack the bandage around the knife and try and keep it as steady and stable as possible so it doesn't do any more damage.
And while we're on the subject of the way these things are portrayed in movies, this has always bugged me. Someone gets like shot in the belly or stabbed in the belly or something like that, and then they have like this 20 or 30-second really dramatic death scene, and then they're gone. That's not going to
No.
kill you that quickly.
Yeah, that's not how that
No.
works.
Either
No.
a bullet or a knife wound or something like that, it's either going to kill you instantly or you're going to linger around for an hour or two.
Oh yeah, it's
Unless you
it's
like hit like a major artery or something like that and bleed out in a few
yeah,
minutes.
if you hit a major artery, you can be dead in under 30 seconds. But if you miss all of the major arteries, there's actually quite a long time that you can survive, especially if you get medical attention.
I mean, talk to military people who have fought in wars. They'll tell you you can fire at someone, hit them in the torso, hit them again, and just keep hitting it, and they're still coming after you because you're just hitting them in places where it's not really hitting anything vital, and you have to keep doing it until they go down.
Yep, Jason's a former, Jason, my friend who I used to talk to, he's a former Army Ranger, and he says, you always see these gun advertisements saying, oh, we've got stopping power. In combat, there's no such thing.
But why does anyone need more than
I remember I read an old U.S. Army report on World War II, and they actually went through all of the combat reports and all the statistics and stuff. That I found it on average in most battles it would take around 1,000 rounds of ammunition to actually kill someone.
Yep.
Does that include missing, or is that if they all hit?
That's including missing.
That does include miss.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that was actually, believe it or not, one of the reasons why World War I and World War II were so deadly was actually because even though the strategies of war were changing, a lot of the countries were still stuck in the old ways, and they were still clung to the idea, well, each individual has a rifle, and, one rifle has one bullet, but it was eventually clear after World War II that doesn't happen, especially with the invention of the machine gun,
Yeah.
Well,
there was actually an episode of Dead. There was actually
smokeless powder in general and rapid firing firearms. The distance and engagement. I mean, you look at the old World War I rifles, and they're sighted out as things like 2.4 kilometers on iron sights.
Yeah, that was
It's like
Yeah,
no.
that was the biggest
That is absolutely completely unnecessary because even in World War I, your typical engagement range for infantry was 300 meters or less.
And that was why they ended up coming out with assault rifles. And you can make a leftist's head explode by pointing out to him that assault rifles are weaker than regular rifles because they're made to go in more of these close quarters.
They're made to do that, and because of course they're designed to provide. As a hobby, I study military history, and the development of the original assault rifle, the Sturmgewehr, it was okay. We want everyone in the squad to have one, so it performs the roles of a regular rifle, a sidearm, a light machine gun, and a submachine gun all at once.
Yep.
That's why they decided on the intermediate cartridge. Was much less gunpowder than a regular rifle cartridge, so it weighs less. You can put it through a automatic weapon.
And you're using less gunpowder, which is a huge issue.
Yep. And it's lighter.
It's lighter, it has less recoil, so automatic fire isn't as inaccurate.
And for the most part, it's made for single fire mode anyway, because you're dealing with people who are, you know, a few hundred feet away or something like that. It's only when they get closer and you're like, oh,
Yeah, it was-
holy shit, and then you turn
like
it up and you have to spray and pray.
exactly. When they actually issued these, they actually instructed the soldiers, like, in almost all cases, you will use single fire. In emergencies or when you're clearing rooms, use automatic, and that's the only time you're using automatic.
Yeah. But anyway, this kind of reminds me of this episode of this old TV show called Deadliest War, and there was a really face-palming episode where they pitted Al Capone versus Jesse James, and in that one, Jesse James won despite the fact that Al Capone had a Tommy gun, and the argument was, well, Jesse James had a Winchester rifle that had longer range and he was more accurate. And I'm like, okay, you take the Winchester rifle, and me and 5 of my buddies will take Tommy guns, and we'll all shoot at you, and you got to hit us all accurately. See how that goes.
But how far does the Second Amendment go? Or can we go up to tanks or nukes? Like, where does it end for human?
Well, I know there was a letter written to, was it one of the founding fathers, or was it very early American politician asking, can I put cannons on my merchant ship to protect myself from pirates? And they're like, yeah, absolutely. Put as big as cannons as you can buy.
Yeah.
Yep.
I actually told this, Shane. I told this on a forum one time. You know, a lot of people like to think, well, what would the founding fathers think about if they were alive today? And I told people if they were alive today, they'd be pissed off, not because of all these weapons, but because the government has, you know, they have tanks, they've got attack helicopters, they've got mines and all this shit, and civilians are restricted from owning them.
You know they haven't done their research when they tell you that the Second Amendment only applied to muskets, and they didn't have anything stronger than that. It's like, look at the history of the Revolutionary War.
Yeah, they had cannons. They had
multiple shot firearms, revolvers. I mean, even your standard musket. It is surprising how many people think that muskets is equal to pea shooter.
Oh no!
Most muskets would be 50 caliber at a minimum.
More than that, they were like 70 or 80 caliber.
Yep.
Yeah, well, at a minimum, and like, you know, 50 caliber was typical of a shortened cavalry carbine because, of course, it needed to be light.
Yeah, I mean,
since we got people here who are knowledgeable about this stuff, can someone explain to me what the hell is the problem with a sawed-off shotgun?
Yeah,
it's concealable.
Because a shorter barrel shotgun would be much better for things like home defense or things like that, because you've got a better chance of hitting the guy. You've got less chance of over-penetration.
It's too concealable.
Yeah. By the way,
you can conceal a friggin' handgun. What is concealable? You can get concealed carry permits.
Because the government wants to control what you do with your own damn property.
Yeah. And by the way, Shane, going back to this whole, you know, concealed carry and overthrowing things, Simon Whistler, you know, like I said, he's a mixed bag, but one thing that he did say, it was about historical myths that made me cringe, was that he said, well, the German people easily could have overthrown the Nazi party, but they didn't because they liked, you know, the policy of the Jews. And he pointed out, well, it's because the Gestapo wasn't well equipped and they were very poorly orchestrated. And I was just thinking, Simon, you forgot a little group called the SS.
Yeah, and
or about things like Kristallnacht.
Yeah,
and the fact that the SS and other parts of the German government after the coup went around and rapidly started confiscating weapons.
Yeah, the Germans couldn't fight back with anything, and not to mention, contrary to what a lot of, you know, Holocaust movies like to portray, the Gestapo didn't really do anything during the Holocaust. They were just police officers. It was the SS you wanted to watch out for.
Yep.
Yeah, you know, I mean, it's pretty funny, you know, that, I mean, there was a guy on a History Channel who was upset because it's like, all these Gestapo, after the war, they just went back to being regular police officers, and I'm saying, because that's what they were. They weren't like these guys that were going after Jews and killing people. They were just police officers.
I mean, that's like complaining about all the German army officers that weren't brought up to trial at the Nuremberg trials. Like, that's because, for the most part, they resisted the Nazification of the German army. I mean, you had some very honorable German military officers that actually cooperated a lot with the U.S. forces.
Well, and you had this pretty much whole underground of people hiding out Jews and helping them escape.
Oh, yeah, if I recall correctly.
German resistance was a very real thing.
And if I recall correctly, Erwin Rommel's, there were actually several, you know, I mean, Erwin Rommel's the most famous, but there were several German officers who were told if you capture any Jews or, you know, inhuman or degenerates in your army, you are to kill them, and they didn't do it.
Actually, there's a very interesting one where a false.
Where do y'all
Jaeger
fall
officer,
on private nukes, seeing as how nukes can't really be used for self-defense?
Yeah, I really like what Murray Rothbard had to say. The Ethics of Liberty is a great book, but even if you don't want to shell out for that, look up War, Peace, and the State. It's an article you can read for free online, and he makes the same argument there. The idea is rifles, assault weapons, things like that, they can be pinpointed against aggressors. You can target the exact people who are causing the problem. You can't do that with nukes. You can't do that with biological or chemical or even traditional conventional bombs.
Well, that would also cover
that puts them in an entirely different class.
That would also cover things like cluster bombs, unexploded ordnance you get with that, and landmines.
Oh, landmines, God. Those things should never have existed to begin with. Who came up with that?
Yeah, they were hated when they first came out. In fact, they were used during the Civil War by the Confederates, and the Union were so fierce about them because so many innocent people were getting killed by them. They actually, if they had captured Confederate POWs, they would say if they were in an area where there were landmines, they say, you guys have to dig them out because you planted them there.
Yeah. It got to where even the Confederacy, a few times of that happening, they were like, no, we're not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that was the thing, because I always just kind of assumed that, okay, World War II's over, we're going to go through our landmines and we're either going to detonate them or, dig them up or whatever. But then I heard about people like, 20, 30, 40 years later, just, oh, here's a nice field. I'm going to farm it. Kaboom. I was like, what?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
A surprising amount of things can happen to a minefield. I mean, the original engineer could have gotten shot. You could have storms washing mines down to the next field over. In the more seismically active areas of the world, you could have movement of the earth because of earthquakes and such, burying or exposing mines and such.
Yeah,
There's a lot of things can happen.
Actually, even to this day, I remember reading there's still cases in Vietnam where people are dying in Vietnam because they're just walking through the woods minding their own business and they accidentally activate an old U.S. Army mine or an old Viet Cong trap. Because after the war was over, neither side really went down there and swept them all up. They just said, okay, war's over, let's go home. Yeah.
Well, it's not like the U.S. could have gone back in.
Well, yeah,
I mean, how would we deal with people trying to acquire nukes if there's no government, if people can pretty much do what they want?
Well, it's one of those situations where it's going to take a lot of resources. It's going to take a lot of time. You're going to have to deal with a lot of people. But at the same time, you need to hope and pray that no one finds out what you're up to.
Yeah.
Because long before your nuke gets built, they're going to catch on to it.
Yep. Actually, Shane, I saw this funny video one time, and it was a parody of all those alternate history fics, and it was about these white racists who go back in time to the U.S. Civil War, and they give an atomic bomb to the Confederacy, and they say, okay, now you can nuke Washington, and the South will win, and then one guy goes, yeah, but there's just one problem. We gave them the atomic bomb, but how are they going to get it to Washington?
Well, and that wasn't their goal anyway, or else. As soon as the first Battle of Bull Run was over, they would have gone straight to Washington. That wasn't their goal.
Yeah.
Their goal wasn't to destroy Washington and take it. It wasn't a civil war, actually.
Yeah.
It was a war of secession.
Yeah. And another thing that people failed to realize was that, in fact, many people actually agree with this. The South, in theory, could have won had they not invaded Maryland. Because that was legitimate. A lot of people have said what the South should have done if they legitimately wanted to fight a war of independence is that they should have just held their ground and make the Union pay for every inch of land they take. But by invading, they legitimized the Union and made the South look like conquerors, so it gave Northerners a bigger incentive to fight them.
But the problem with that was, as the North went through the South, they were just destroying infrastructure all over the place, just like burning entire towns and stuff. And they were actually doing pretty good on the military side of the war. They were losing the economic side of the war, so they had to kind of take the fight to the North to make the North feel some of the economic consequences of the war.
Yeah.
That and the North was more industrialized anyway.
Yeah. It's another fun alternative take I like that I really love to debunk about the Civil Wars. People said, well, if Britain and France had had supported the Confederacy, the North would have won. And I'm like, yeah, but the Northern, we were really close friends with Prussia, Austria, Russia, and many other nations. So France and...
Didn't the North essentially pay off most other European countries to either boycott or not help this Confederacy? I remember reading that happening.
In fact, if I recall correctly, the British actually, contrary to popular belief, they didn't support the South either. They actually were petitioning the South to try to cease all aggressions, and they say, if you want to secede, fine, but do it peacefully because your war is destroying our trade with you guys.
But that wasn't an option because the North kept invading.
Yep. Here's another fun fact. Capitalism once ended a war between the United States and England, the War of 1812. The reason why the war won wasn't because somebody, won a military victory. It was because British and American merchants were losing so much money from the war that they petitioned their governments to say, can you stop the damn fighting? We're losing money.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, it's like 20 after 4. We've been after this for well over 2 hours, so I think we better wrap it up.
Yep, okay. I
think this is a good first live stream. The chat room wasn't all that active because we've still got people, I guess, coming over trying to find it. So maybe future live streams will be a little more active and we'll have more participants in the chat room and more participants on the microphone. But thanks, everyone, for coming.
It's good to meet you guys.
Yeah, good to meet you.
Yep.
I'll try to do another one for the patrons this month since technically I think this was supposed to be the one for last month. So, well, we're working.
Hey, Shane, when are you going to do the Ask Me Anything?
I'll go over at the first of the month. I always just go over the questions that were posed in there and then run through and do the answers. And it's usually the first week or two, and then I'll post another AMA in the Patreon. So
it's good to meet you, Shane.
Yeah, good to meet you.
Yeah, same.
All right, and thank you for joining us.
Bye.